Thank you so much for that introduction. We will now start the first session, and as I mentioned before, there will be a separate moderator here, and that's my co-fellow here in the Academy, Cecilia Nordin from Gansberghe. Almost correct. Always difficult. Welcome here, and I leave the time management and the management to you.
Thank you. I'm sure we will be told off if we do not follow it. But it's wonderful to see so many people here and also hopefully online. And this will be a panel giving with a very long perspective. So the idea is that each member of the panel will speak for 5 to 7 minutes. And once we have all heard from them, we will discuss in the panel, but also take questions from the online presence, but also from you here in the audience. So the Swedish FAO Committee and its 75th anniversary is an excellent time to discuss our cooperation with FAO and how it has evolved and changed and adapted to the developments mentioned by the State Secretary. And in the first panel, we have people who know what they're talking about. They have very long-standing commitment to and work with all aspects of the food systems at all levels. And I'm sure they will give us the benefit of their experience and important pointers for future work, which we hope the youth panel and the committee will take. And I think the State Secretary and myself have studied the same papers because Sweden, of course, you know how we are. When we joined the European Union, we all read what all the things we had to do, and we did them. We joined FAO in 1950. We read the basic texts, which is the FAO Constitution, and we create an FAO committee under the leadership of the Minister of Agriculture. And the Swedish committee was composed by a chairperson, the state secretary, and 5 members. But as stated, an expert panel. And I will allow myself the pleasure of telling you who were on this expert panel. They're wide range. They represented public health, fisher folk on the West Coast, Institute of Veterinary Science, the Fishing Authority, Swedish agricultural workers, the Forestry Association, the Agriculture University, forestry owners, the Board of Practical Education, Forestry Board, a Country Folk Association, and my favorite, the Forestry and Log Driving Flottnings Association, and also agriculture architecture. So already from the beginning, there was an understanding that we need to look wide at the activities. And the committee started immediately. So they worked on how to share Swedish expertise globally. And in 1951, there was already one expert working on horticulture aspects in developing countries. And another one was expected to assume a position to develop sawmills in Austria. That is a clue. This is a reminder that the FAO is a normative institution. The idea is that they should know everything about forestry, food, and fisheries, and share its knowledge with the members, and also try to get members to work together to offer a neutral, impartial platform for discussions and meetings. And I'm sure we'll hear more about how that works. It can be further be noted that FAO is the first specialized UN agency to be created on the 10th of October 1945, just after the war, in Quebec, Canada. And one fact I always found interesting was that there was much discussion on where the organization should be permanently located. It could have been Denmark, it could have been Switzerland, it could have been in New York, it could have been the US or Italy. Finally, Rome was chosen, but with only 2 votes. So it could have been a different organization. And it did marketing and did exhibitions. And for those of you who have visited FAO in Rome, will have noticed that there is a red room and a green room where sessions are held. In between, there's a space called the Nordic Lounge. And the Nordic Lounge is one example of how Nordic countries work together and how countries in general can work together to achieve something like that. With that said, I was there for the refurbishment of the Nordic Lounge, and there was quite a lot of discussions. But even to this day, the Nordic countries share a seat on the FAO Council, which means that we're always represented there. And it sort of gives us a special little sideline to the EU, which has been very appreciative at times. And we will see how the FAO committee has evolved to fit today's much different world. It's much more efficient than before. It works in a structured way and grabs the opportunity to inform the discussions with, for instance, their topical publication, as mentioned by the State Secretary. And I know that these publications are appreciated and are read, even years after they have been published. Overall, Sweden maintains a strong dialogue with FAO on its own and through the EU and Nordic countries. And we have a strong voice. And we have since several years now also been present in the guiding committees of FAO, which has been very useful for Sweden. And my own reflections, because I would like everybody on the panel to give pointers. I worked in the field in Laos and Sierra Leone and also at the Swedish representative to FAO. I still think that FAO's width, as to its knowledge, remains underappreciated. FAO knows much more and could share much more if people were interested. And global discussions have strongly advanced, and understanding of the necessity of looking at global food chains has advanced, especially in the last 5 years. Politics take, and unfortunately will take up much space, which underlies the necessity of facilitating contact between individuals, organizations, and countries. And also, all partners need to participate, governments, NGO, and the private sector. We do that in the Committee for Food Security. It's not easy, but it just has to be done. Well, thank you. Now, I hope that we will get a picture on the board, because I would like to give the floor to our grand old man, an honorary Koisela fellow. This is Mr. Inge Gerremo, which I'm sure 98% of you in the room are very familiar with. All our panel participants have a long-range perspective, but Inge has the longest. I hope, Inge, the floor is yours. I hope you can...
Hello, hello.
Hello. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Can you see me also?
No, not yet.
Oh.
Ah, there you are.
Okay. Can I go on?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for asking me to say a few words about FAO's role in a Swedish context and in the early years of our relationship. Let me already now state that I'm convinced that FAO, like WHO, will have to play an even more important role in the future as the world becomes more and more globalized, and whatever is said by today's US administration. My own contacts with FAO started already in the latter part of 1960s, and I has continued since then over the last 50 years. So in the first 25 years, I was related to the Swedish Development Corporation, but became later on related, linked to the FAO governing bodies and to FAO's role in relation to the environmental conventions established after the Rio Conference in 1992. In the 1960s, FAO's role was felt more important for the developing world than for us in the developed world. And when the Swedish Parliament decided to implement the famous bill 1962-100 on development cooperation, rural development was among the priority areas. At that At the same time, Swedish experiences from developing countries in those days were quite modest, and we very much needed the experience of FAO. In the early 1970s, I became involved in establishing an agriculture division in Sida. FAO had developed a new interesting concept, integrated rural development, and I was asked to build up close relations with the FAO staff in the Rome headquarters for the IRD strategy. This strategy became also quite relevant for our own bilateral activities. We also became involved in a number of other more specific fields like animal husbandry, plant breeding, forestry, and later on fisheries. In a few areas, we were actually able to recruit some rather senior Swedish staff to FAO headquarters. Animal husbandry and plant breeding were some of them. Another very interesting example can be found in the forestry field. Professor Börje Stenberg from the Royal College of Technology, KTH, became in 1968 head of FAO's forest department. He got the brilliant idea to offer a number of so-called associate expert posts to young Swedish foresters. They therefore got early experience from all, as well the field activities in various developing countries as from the FAO headquarters. So when Sida later decided to finance a number of bilateral forestry activities in countries like Ethiopia and Tanzania, we could build them on some rather experienced Swedish personnel. We were during this early part financing a huge number of training courses run by FAO in areas I just mentioned. The most famous ones, as I see it, were those in animal reproduction and pathology at the College of Veterinary Medicine, started and organized by the legendary Professor Nils Lagerlöf, and primarily for Indian students. This led to a situation that most Indian veterinarians dealing with animal reproductions for decades had been trained in Sweden. Even more exciting to remember is that when Lagerlöf died in 1970, this message was broadcasted on radio all over India. One of the major events in FAO initiated by Sweden during these years was the World Conference on Agrarian Reform and Rural Development, the WACAD conference. It focused primarily on issues like agrarian reforms, women's development, and nutrition, thinking of the new report, by the way. In similar ways, we were very instrumental in turning some of the FAO traditional forestry activities into programs for social forestry in order to focus more on the poorest segments of the societies in developing countries. A similar activity was the huge Bay of Bengal program on small-scale fisheries. Some of these activities might these days have been classified too woke, to use a new word, to be accepted by today's US delegation to FAO. Later, plant genetics and climate-related issues were highlighted by us, as well as the avian flu after the outbreak in the beginning of the year 2000, receiving huge Swedish support, around 200 million Swedish kronor over a few years. That made us the second largest donor and gave us the possibility to establish a lot of valuable high-level international contacts. Ulf Magnusson might elaborate more on that later. Unfortunately, all this coincided with a period in the early 90s of less interest by the Swedish government in agriculture development. However, later on, specifically climate-related agriculture issues have fortunately been more focused at, as well as agriculture activities in connection with the environment conventions. This brings me back to where I started, saying that the mandate of FAO will no doubt be of great important in the years to come. We will need a strong government interest and understanding, and we need to prepare a new cadre of Swedish experts to contribute to FAO's important task. I can see an exciting role also for the Academy in this work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Inge. Well, it sounds a bit like the Swedish national anthem. We know that you are what you were, so we hope that you will be a true prophet when it comes to spreading Swedish expertise, because now we will have one of the excellent proponents of spreading Swedish expertise. I have the honor of working with Dr. Wolf Magnusson when it comes to get the ball rolling on countering antimicrobial resistance, the slow pandemic. Having learned a lot, I really look forward to hearing your insights on working with FAO. Do you need help with the, yeah? Well, that's when you have really advanced in your career, you get assistance. So I think it was an important point that Inge made, that of having young people participate in the work of international organizations, and that they will come back at a later date, which those of us who have seen had a bit of a longer perspective. We have noticed that people do come back, so I think that's something to keep in mind. When you're ready, Ulf, the floor is yours.
I grew up professionally in a very FAO friendly atmosphere, as we heard. One of my predecessors in the professorship, Nils Lagerlöf, in the 50s, was having a tight connection with FAO. And we also, our department worked as a collaborative center for animal reproduction for FAO. However, I want to, and this is not for telling my whole CV, it's just to grasp some parts that I want to highlight. I have the privilege to be in the faculty management of the newly formed Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and Animal Sciences. And we decided there, a very strategic decision, that we could contribute more to the development agenda, because as Inge said, that agriculture in general and livestock in particular was not on the Swedish agenda. So it was really an uphill thing to promote that, because we thought we could contribute more. So we approached Sida, which was kind of intermediate with the connection to FAO and of course to the global discussions. And we were, if I allowed to say, fortunate that this avian flu pandemic or epidemic, global epidemic, I should say, came around in 2005. And as Inge Gerremo said, it was Sweden was a big donor for that program. So we were given a task to arrange a small Swedish reference group with experts from different governmental agencies, and I had the privilege to chair that group. And we were traveling to some parts in the world to see on the ground what's going on, but also I was asked by the permanent representative at FAO, Christer Öborn at that time, to participate in a steering committee among diplomats, but I was a technical person and I was not really used to their linga, so I was too frank and too honest, and so, but it was interesting. And also another reflection from that time was that it was somewhat difficult to approach the technical expertise authorities in Sweden to engage their staff in this reference group, even though they were paid a small sum. Because Sweden was, this is 20 years ago, and Sweden was still very preoccupied in adopting to EU. The world ended EU was the only part that were international part we were focusing on to be, maybe I generalize a little bit, but it was a bit tricky to get that, to make that happening. Then also we were tasked to participate in reforming the veterinary system in the poorest of all former Soviet republics, Tajikistan, just north of Afghanistan. And we had the same setup with the SLU as a coordinator, and then other expert agencies or experts from agencies, and they were working with FAO in that. And that was also very interesting to see the, if I'm allowed to say, the slightly difference between the things going on in the headquarters in Rome and on what is going on in at that time a very corrupt country with the FAO work. So I think this kind of different perspectives on the FAO work was very interesting in seeing the differences, to be simple there. And then we were engaging in something that called the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock that was hosted by FAO and still is. And in that sense, we have been used to the coordinate system in the FAO building and some faces and people and so we get known. And Swedish farmers and Swedish veterinarians are world leading in having a highly productive livestock, raising highly productive livestock with the lowest possible amount of antibiotics. And we were approached to give courses from colleagues from other parts of the world on how to do this. We were asked to publish books and teaching materials, and I want to acknowledge all the permanent representatives that were pushing this. I think it was a kind of mutual benefit, I hope so, and it was a fantastic opportunity for us to influence something in a public good way. And then I was lately, when I was part-time working at SLU, I've been working as senior advisor for FAO in their work on AMR in the so-called quadripartite setup. And that is a constellation of WHO, UNEP, FAO, and World Organization for Animal Health. And that was a very interesting experience to see the interaction between these four organizations and the complexity in this. And to try to sum up, I also want to acknowledge the importance of having people in the experts in the house, in the headquarters. Sweden had the Department of Rural Affairs, or Ministry of Rural Affairs, had an expert, Gunilla Eklund, seconded in AMR, and her work to open doors, to be active, and so was cannot be underestimated. And also the modality of GPOs, I think. And I think it's, how to say it, I think if you as an individual want to contribute to a better world, I think the UN system, it's difficult. It's complicated, it's multicultural, it's a bureaucracy that you're not used to as a Swede. Maybe it's needed, but it's a fantastic opportunity, and it's very qualified people out there. And as an organization or a government, and so I think, especially nowadays when we talk about food system and food security, again, it was not on the table. I think it's a must to look outside EU, and I think FAO is the partner to seek there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulf. Thank you very much. That dovetailed very nicely with what, please stay there. What Inge said, that we can only improve organizations if people move around and can understand the different organizations and how they work to improve their working together. Now we're getting into really in medias res, because we will now listen to Pernilla Ivarsson, who is just finishing 5 years in Rome. She will give us the benefit of her experience with FAO, especially as she's been very active in the finance committee, which gives us a very good view on how FAO works from the inside.
May I comment? I was
Yes.
sitting in the Swedish FAO committee for 6 years as well, and that was a very interesting aspect to see the Swedish interaction with FAO through the committee. So that is another perspective that is important.
Yes,
to know.
you have to connect to be able to discuss. Pernilla, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. As you saw, I'm not very good with technical stuff, but with the help, I could put this on. Thank you so much for being invited to be part of this panel with colleagues from which I've known actually over the years. So that's really nice. Over the last 5 years, I had the honor of serving as Sweden's representative to FAO. And on a personal level, I don't think I've ever, during my professional career, experienced a more transformative or turbulent time. We've been through a number of global crises. We lived through a pandemic that turned into then a full-scale war in Europe with 2 countries that are, we realized, producing a lot of all the food that is keeping a lot of Africa in food. We've seen climate change, we've seen deepening of conflicts. At the same time where we are now, we see the threat that the development funding will decrease. These challenges, for me, underscores the vital role of agriculture, of food systems, of rural livelihoods, and also the importance of investing in food systems from a systemic perspective, which is a key to address today's global challenges and reaching the SDGs. While everyone in this room and those online is, I think, very much aware of this, I hope that the last 5 years have actually also brought a more broadly understanding of these truths outside the sector itself. Cecilia already pointed out the role of FAO and its critical role in collecting data, translating it into actionable knowledge, guiding countries on how to manage national resources and the best policies to implement sustainable solutions. And I think over time, and this is also what Inge referred to, FAO has evolved from a rather technical expertise organization with a fantastic knowledge of agriculture, forestry, and fisheries into now embracing food systems in their full complexity, including climate, livelihoods, and societal resilience. Yet, despite this, there is, I think, still a risk that FAO outside, again, the sector, is seen as this organization that deals with cows and crops. But if we want to build a very strong future-oriented partnership, we need to challenge and we need to expand that narrative. And this day, I have to say that the Swedish FAO Committee has helped to do just that. And I think that the recent, or this publication that will be published today on innovation and circularity in bioeconomy is a great example of this broader approach that aligns well with the FAO's strategic direction, but also actually address EU priorities. So I was asked to highlight some of the key ways in which we have partnered or are partnering with FAO in recent years. And just before doing that, I just want to encourage all of you, because when I look out over the audience here, I think that many of you already are in contact with FAO in various ways. And it's not always that we who work in the embassy with FAO is actually aware of that. So I encourage all of you also to keep us informed on what you are doing, which meetings you have. That would be important to me, but I'm on my way of leaving. My successor, Maria Milivojevic, is sitting at the end of this waving. So keep us informed of what you are doing, which meetings you have, because I think that will help us to be much stronger as Sweden. So what have we done? I think some of this has already been referred to. We seconded staff to key areas. AMR, antimicrobial resistance, was one of them. Implementation of the private sector strategy, which was also something that the FAO Committee spent a lot of time in putting forward a publication. We have someone now in human resources, a very strategic area, and we have a person seconded to the UN System Hub for Food Systems. Through Sida, we have supported JPOs, and I agree completely with Ulf. These are really extremely important positions. If you walk around the corridors of FAO where you don't honestly see so many Swedes, if you meet some of them, they normally have been starting their career as a JPO. We have also taken steps to deepen our overall partnership, including in 2024, we had a strategic meeting where high-level people from FAO, from the leadership team, came and had meetings with a broad participation from the Swedish side. They met with people from Parliament, from the ministries, with the FAO Committee, with students at the University of Agriculture, research funders, and NGOs. And one milestone here was actually the signing of a MOU between FAO and the Swedish University of Agriculture, which opens up new ways of research cooperation and exchange. These efforts reflect not really a beginning, but rather a continuation of our long-standing engagement with FAO. I'm also, like others, really happy that there is a section here that addresses youth and youth interest, because I think that is for the future one of the really important ways. If we get the next generation interested, that will make a difference on the global food system. So I'd say we need to stay proactive to remain relevant in shaping the global agenda. Also would like to mention that much of the work that Sweden is doing actually takes place at country level through Sida and our colleagues in the embassies. Just one small example, there are many, is a public-private partnership in Colombia, which is with Colombia's dairy sector, but it involves FAO, it involves the Swedish embassy, of course, the ministry in Colombia, and Tetra Laval. As a small country, we need to focus on where we can bring the added value. Forestry, and I think Inge talked about that, used to be one such niche. Unfortunately, today, many of the experts we used to have in FAO has retired. Personally, I find that really sad, because I think we need and would need more forestry expertise in FAO from Sweden, also for us to gain the knowledge that can come back. But maybe it's time to find new fields where Sweden can lead. I leave you with that, because I think it's for all of us to think of where would those areas be. Finally, and Cecilia hasn't coughed yet, so I
did cough.
This year, FAO is celebrating its 80th anniversary. As you realize, we didn't become members until after 5 years. There are many events that is planned in FAO, especially those around World Food Day, which will be celebrated on October 16 during the World Food Forum, which will have themes around youth, around science and investments. There will be a new museum, which the Director General and Italy is inaugurating. there will be the first exhibition from seed to food. Member states will have the opportunity to, I hear, showcase innovation and flagship initiatives. Maybe this is a great opportunity for Sweden to highlight some of our contributions. And I leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Pernilla, take your seat. Yes, if you start off as a JPO, you end up here. Just so that you know. And now we get to Annika Otterstedt, director at Sida, with long experience from working on several continents with development work. You can choose whatever, just put your microphone on, and your end station will be the chair, but you can move around if you like to. Yes. So how does FAO stand up to other UN organizations in the field? Because I remember FAO from Laos. I cannot say that it was the most respected UN organization in Laos.
Is it functioning? Do I need to turn it on?
No, I think it's on.
It's on. Thank you.
You have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I think I will move around because it's a bit easier. I just wanted to start off saying that I love being here. This is like where I was born, in FAO. I visited the FAO offices the first time in 1971 as a 5-year-old with my father, who was then positioned as a bilateral expert in Rongai, Tanzania, with a forestry project. And my uncle, he was then positioned in FAO headquarters in Rome as a bilateral expert. So that's my connection to all of you. I now work as deputy director at Sida, or director for the results department, which is pretty tough, but also the assistant director general of Sida. I wanted to say that I have so many good examples from my work with FAO. You mentioned Colombia, Pernilla. When I was there, we worked with a very interesting resilience project in the very southern part of Colombia, which was super difficult. It was in a very crowded forestry, rainforest, but FAO did a very good job trying to create opportunities for farmers, not having then to work together with the FARC guerrilla, because they would become more self-sufficient and they could get their own supplies of food. So that was also a project that we then extrapolated to other areas of Colombia. I just came back from Kenya, and there we had a couple of interesting partnerships with FAO. I wouldn't say that they're always easy. Somebody mentioned corruption. I'm not mentioning corruption here, but if you work in a context such as Kenya or other countries, corruption is always a very present part of cooperation, which we want to avoid, of course. But I must say that FAO in Kenya really did create very many opportunities in relation to the state-to-state support that Sweden had with Kenya, trying to create, and also creating, I must say, a system of statistics where all farmers, basically 6.4 million farmers in Kenya, they were all brought into the same system. And this project was called Kiamis, and it was the flagship of the Kenyan government of President Ruto. And it was the project that the Swedish embassy, or Sweden in Kenya, most times had visible in the newspapers in Kenya, which is also saying that Swedish development cooperation, when it's good and working together with UN partners, is also a way to portray Sweden in other countries. I think where we are now, and I know some of you have read an article in several articles basically in the newspapers on how Sida and how Swedish Development Corporation is working with agriculture, forestry and fisheries nowadays. And some people might think that it has decreased too much. And I agree. I think that considering the importance of creating sustainable systems of food production and market systems for trading of food products and wood products or fishery is probably one of the most important sectors that you can work in many developing countries. Not only developing countries, I would say these days, taking security factors into account, it is probably one of the most, perhaps the most important sector that we can focus on, both in Sweden, Europe, and in other countries. If you then add the climate perspective, we also realize that we need to focus on sustainable systems. We need to create some sort of awareness, I think, today that we in Sweden and people in many countries are interdependent. It's by creating functioning trade system, by decreasing the loss of food in this system, but also by ensuring that we have more traditional species, still functioning in many countries when we have the climate change coming. That's also important. I want also to say something about what has happened during the spring. We all know that USAID, who has been a very important development partner in agriculture, primarily agriculture in this context, but also forestry, but basically extremely important in all sectors. And so what happened then when the Trump administration decided to cut out basically all aid over the night by closing down the USAID, it meant that between 15 to 40% of all the support in the world to agriculture, energy, water, health systems, and the humanitarian system closed down. And the impact that had is, of course, both immediate and long term. The immediate effect was that many of our partners, many of the people that we support and work with, did not get food, water, if you speak about humanitarian aid, basically within a week. It was, shut down. But also the infrastructure for many of the, for example, the broad agriculture programs that perhaps, Sida has been financing together with USAID, that did serve millions and millions of farmers. When one partner withdraws, that the effect is that the program doesn't work any longer, basically. So then you need to find new partners and you need to find new ways of working. But I would say that that impact has had an immense effect during the spring on not only on farmers or everybody working in the agricultural sector, but everybody who's also dependent on that sector and as I said, all other sectors. And I think that is problematic in two different perspectives. The one is, of course, that humanitarian needs are now increasing. But what is humanitarian aid? It is basically providing people with food and water. So if you do not produce food, you have a problem. And now we have the Ukraine effect, which is decreasing the total production of agriculture. And then you have the US effect, which is, of course, a little bit troublesome now that they have decreased their support to humanitarian aid. A lot of that food support came from the agricultural sector in the US. So I think that's something we need to bear in mind. Another very important process that is going on now is, as somebody mentioned, the UN80 process, which is the process where the UN agencies now need to think about how to increase efficiency with less income. The budget has decreased for basically all UN agencies, and I think it will be very important to see how FAO will enable itself to prove that the results of the work has been and will be so important that we need to maintain the financial support to FAO. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Rita.
Well, we did have a root and branch review about 10, 15 years ago, and the answer was that if we didn't have FAO, we'd have to invent it. So Hopefully that is both true. Now we throw ourselves on the mercy of Mr. Uber, moderator. Can we leave space for? Okay, good. So the floor is open for questions from the online participants and also in the room here. If you're in the room, please stand up, say your name and your question. See, this can go much faster in the room because everybody has understood everything and is not wondering about anything. Okay, can I just ask you quickly, starting with Inge, do you hear us still, Inge? Well, maybe finishing with Inge then. What is the, what has changed most in working with FAO? If you have any observations. For instance, Annika,
Yeah.
you seem to imply that the very good work was done on the field. Was that due to the person directing FAO, or was it the institution that allowed that?
I would say it's the institution, of course, but then it's, I mean, in the country context, it's very important who the director is. That's for sure. I wanted to add that you also asked us before, what is the future? And I think functioning food systems, both in terms of the production part, taking climate change into account, but also the nutrition part, the healthy food systems perspective, which is also, I think, very interesting to young people and might be the future for FAO.
Well, I must say, FAO did jump on that ship about 10, 12 years ago when it started a nutrition department, which was completely new for FAO.
Yeah.
Pernilla, what have you, because you have seen FAO for at least 25 years. So what do you think has changed most in the organization's way of working?
Well, I haven't been working inside FAO, but what has changed from 2000 to 2025 is actually in the way the organization is financed. In 2000, 20% came from extra budgetary funding and 80% came from the members' contributions. Today, we have more or less the opposite, which means that from a governance point of view, this is extremely challenging, and it must be really challenging also from inside the organization. You are depending, if 80% come from funds that is actually coming voluntary, you really have, how can you build in a strategy to deal with that? It's one thing we saw in 2022, this increased enormously because people were generous and providing funds because there was a need in the world. But how do you manage that from what you mentioned as corruption? How can you, in a good way, make this into something where it makes sense? And then if you have a sharp decrease, you have to deal with that as well. So it's, I think, that are challenging for, and as always, the balance between the normative role, which is actually what we want FAO to be, have the best knowledge and give the best advice, and then how that relates to what is achieved at the field, and a lot of the work is now done at the decentralized level. But I think there is a challenge, and it's also sort of from what members expect of the organization.
It is a huge challenge. I've always admired them to get the budget and the program for the budget together, because it might change stroke of a pen from Mr. Trump, for instance. Ulf?
Yeah, I have seen 3 different DGs, and I think, as you said, Annika, it's depending very much on the DG, because it's in contrast to Swedish agencies, it's a very hierarchic organization. I guess that all UN organizations are like that. So that is one important element. And then I agree what you said, Pernilla. When I work close to colleagues at headquarters, they are, I should not say more or less, but they are very much fundraiser. They are really looking for this program external money for running the programs and so on. So I think that is a misuse of highly qualified people to do that. And I don't know whether that is a change over time. I think you had some figures, so I take that over time. That is my
Let's
general
listen to
comments.
Inge briefly, and then Annika that would be the last word. Inge, please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I didn't get the question rightly, but I just want to point out, I mean, the tremendous experience that is in FAO headquarters among the personnel. And nowadays, it's also a lot of very knowledgeable people from developing countries. That was not the case when I started. It only post-colonial officers, etc. But today it is. And also the importance of trying to have a long-term idea how we could get more Swedish experts into the FAO headquarters, and understanding of that the UN system is working quite differently from what we are used to, and we have to get knowledge about that way of working. But I think there is a tremendous possibility to join if we want to do something in developing countries bilaterally. We should join with organizations like FAO in order to increase that the possibilities or the achievements we can get. Thank you.
Thank you, Inge. And Annika, final word?
Two things. Because of the Swedish government's reform agenda, I think there is a new opportunity to much more focus on Swedish technology, Swedish innovations, Swedish partnerships, and through authorities, but also local communities, civil society, research, but companies, to link all that knowledge and the experience to FAO, and using development cooperation funding in addition to private funding. That's when we can also get more of a buy-in from the Swedish population, I think, in these topics. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening, and thank you for your indulgence, Rolf. And I just want to say that the organization that I presently represent, Swedish International Agriculture Development Initiative, does do these things, trying to put networks into contact with other networks. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panel and to Cecilia. And we are now going to one of the highlights today with the publication of a new book. I leave the floor and the room to Anders Malmer, who is an external resource to the Swedish Agricultural University. The floor is yours and your panel.
Thank you so much. You know, this is really interesting, and I feel a little bit embarrassed almost breaking this very interesting historical discussion and how we exponentially approach to stages which are more and more turbulent. So anyway, now we come into the presentation of the publication. So as mentioned by the State Secretary, around 20 years, we have had these kind of publications from the FAO Committee, sometimes annually, sometimes biannually. This time it's biannual, and they come in various current valuable thematics each year or every second year, bringing up Swedish current activity and prioritized directions, and for example, including avoiding antibiotic resistance in livestock, water management, natural resources management since the Stockholm Environmental Conference 1972, and for example, sustainability as the business model for agriculture. They are all actually available at the FAO Committee website, so I recommend them. Most of them are still very relevant. So this year's publication, as mentioned, Innovation and Drivers for Circularity and Bioeconomy. And hard copies are available in the back, and of course it will come up on the website as well. It's in Swedish and in English, so 2 of them. For this part, for the panel, we are happy to have 3 presentations of chosen chapters or text in the publication. One is more general, introducing the theme. One is an example of activity within Sweden, and one is an example of Swedish activity globally and for development in the South. So, I will present the panelists, and they will come up and have a seat right away, all of them. And while sitting there, you can do the microphone as well. And we also have another chair with it wood, and but we have 3 microphones, so you can figure out how to share those in a good way. First, we will have a presentation by Ivar Virgin. Ivar, please. Ivar is a research fellow at the Stockholm Environmental Institute. He's a doctor of biochemistry. And from his position, he works with issues around global bioresources and how countries, mainly in Africa, can access modern bioscience. We are happy to have him here because he's sometimes very busy being also a grain farmer in the region of Västergötland in southwest Sweden. After that, we have Krishan Kent. Krishan is the chair for the Swedish Fishfood Association, at the same time being a commercial manager at Mare Nord, which is a major Nordic seafood producer. Krishan is an economist from Gothenburg Business School and has about 20 years experience in working with seafood. In 1924, he was awarded a gold fish from the Marine Stewardship Council for being the driving spirit of the year. And for the international part, we have Ingrid Öborn. Ingrid is a professor, chair of agriculture cropping systems at the Swedish University of Agriculture Science. And she is also a research fellow with the World Agroforestry Center. She has extensive and broad experience in research and policy internationally, practice of cropping systems and agroforestry, as well as pastoralism from both East Africa and Southeast Asia. And finally, but definitely not least, we have also from FAO to also bring perspective of our publication and what we discuss here in this part. Thais Juvenal. She is since 10 years back team leader in forest governance and economics and at FAO. Trained as an economist, she did 15 years in the Brazilian National Development Bank, which was followed by focus on environmental governance and finance. That included the global financial climate change architecture and the effective delivery of technical and financial support during developing countries for REDD+, sustainable forestry and the bioeconomy. And she did that in posts from head of the Brazilian Forest Service, as well as deputy head of the UN REDD Secretariat. So, wonderful panel, welcome. Great to have you here, and good initiative there, Ivar, with the water. And if you are ready with microphones, I introduce you, Ivar. We are a little bit short of time, and we will not shorten down your coffee break. We will do our utmost to do that. Please.
in a sense, I've been part of this transition from where the bioeconomy has gone from a research field to a cross-sector and inclusive model for, in sense, solving or sustainable economic development, inclusive economic development, hopefully. And as a biochemist also, you look at the scene, well, I'll go back there. So what is the bioeconomy? In the sense, you open up new frontiers where you can use resources from agriculture, from forestry, from aqua, marine resources in a way of and using the components of that systems into new products, be it new nutritional food products, be it new bio-based chemicals, be it new wood-based products, be it new aquaculture products, whatever. So that's the sort of the engine around bioeconomy in a sense. And then we come into the sort of the wish list, what the bioeconomy can do. And we think that it's, and I also believe that it's one of the tools to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. It's a way to connect farmers to markets, especially so in the global south. It's a way of supporting multifunctionality, which we need more multifunctionality in our landscape, and the bioeconomy is one way to support that. Novel food products, more nutrition we talked about, it's a way bioeconomy can play a role there. And it's a whole system around resource-efficient agroforestry and value chains. And you have where Sweden is quite active in the bio-based chemicals from the forestry sector and novel forest and fiber products, new wood products, building in wood, cross-laminated wood, which is a big thing, which we'll hear, which we have in this publication. We have a story about that. And then we have the bioenergy sector. So there's a lot of expectations of what the bioeconomy can deliver. But as a system, or as the bioeconomy needs to be regulated, it needs to be incentivized, it needs to be capacitated, it needs to have a structure. So we have a lot of bioeconomy strategies being developed. We have a European bioeconomy strategy. We have a Swedish bioeconomy strategy being in the making. We have also run a lot of bioeconomy policies around the world. And the International Advisory Council to the Global Bioeconomy Summit did an inventory of all the different type of policy work around the globe. And what's interesting also is to note that the bioeconomy takes different shapes in different parts of the region, in different parts of the world. In Europe, I would say that the bioeconomy is seen as a vehicle for decarbonization and circularity. In the US and in China and Japan, it's about biomanufacturing, keeping the edge, technology edge, producing novel type of goods. In Latin America, we have both the sort of a more resource-efficient economy and more value chains around soya and all that, but we also have something called the socio-bioeconomy, which is a new thing, which is different type of product from the Amazon basin, for example, being an alternative to logging, an alternative to deforestation. What can we get out of the forest as part of providing that multifunctionality? And in Africa, where I'm quite active actually, that's bioeconomy is seen as a way of connecting small-scale farmers to markets and new value chains, but also a way of creating jobs in that sector. And we talked about this morning with Thais visiting SEI, that we have in Africa the level of primary produce officially is quite low. Only less than 10% of all the primary produce has any value addition to it. And then in the informal sector, there's probably more, but still there's a lot of scope in value addition. And I'm a farmer myself from the Västgötaslätten in Sweden. And we stand and fall with our value chains in the bioeconomy. If we wouldn't have the mills, the different type of biorefinery, the different type of biofuel factories, we wouldn't be in business basically. And that's what many countries in the global south are lacking. You have the small-scale farmers, which often doesn't have a way of storing, a way of processing. So he or she, usually she, stands there with all the produce, and everybody produce at the same time. So they have a lot of post-harvest losses, and the prices go rock bottom. So without that market segment, without those value chains, and I used to be very much a bioresource production person, coming from, we need to increase production. I still think we have to do that, but I increasingly think that the demand side and that the value chain part is equally important. And I think there the bioeconomy plays an important role. So I'll end there with just looking at, there we have the book here where we have several different contributions. We'll hear more about some of the contributions from some of the authors here. So I leave it at that. You can read the titles of the content of the book. I just want to mention that I think Sweden can be and is actually a quite great resource in supporting the bioeconomy, not only in Sweden but also in our global south partners countries, and not least Sida, which I'm working a bit with. I work with a lot. Sida has been supported, for example, the Bioinnovate Africa and the Bioeconomy program, which is, I would say, Bioinnovate Africa is the best bioincubator platform in Africa, linking innovation to actors trying to sort of scale up and reach the market with their bio-based produce. And you have the SIANI platform, the other Bioeconomy side. You have many projects which Sida has created. And you have Formas, which is also creating this what is it called, your program, Ingrid? Trial and Transformation, which is also a fantastic program, part of the bioeconomy. So I'll leave it at that now.
Thank you, Ivar. Thank you. Me and Cecilia have the same indication for our cough, but my cough is better, maybe. Thanks to Ivar. Krishan, please.
Yes, thank you. Ivar, it was excellent that you started before me.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I'll try to guide you through the blue economy. I first say I'm very honored to represent the blue economy. I'm also very happy that Sweden has put the blue economy within the FAO Committee since 2 years. It's been fantastic, and we all appreciate it in the industry. The Sweden Seafood Association is the trade and processing and the lake fishery and the aquaculture of Sweden. It's a big organization. It's a unique organization because it combines the value chain of the Swedish blue food economy. So it's a really, really interesting organization. So please learn more about it. I will take you through the opportunities of the blue economy. I think that Sida here brought some interesting insights, and that is you help others by being better yourself, because then you can give good examples, especially if you have companies and sectors where you are leading. So we have a special importance in Sweden because we have a quite substantial amount of water. We have some good fish stocks. So we have a resource that we actually can use and utilize in a way that we can show other countries, especially countries where nutrition is not taken for granted, on how to use the water resources in a better way. So our article is based on the Swedish blue economy. I have a case study. We also have some enablers from that case studies, and then some solutions going forward from a Swedish point, but we think it's also important from a global perspective. I think actually that I could keep the presentation here and I will speak instead of showing slides. The slides will be available later. So our case study is from the West Coast. It's from a small coastal community called Sotenäs. In Sotenäs, there are 3 major companies in the Swedish seafood sector. It's Orkla, which you all know when you eat the herring in the midsummer. It's the ABBA brand, for example. And it's the Marinor, and then it's Felt's fish, and then it's Lerøy salmon production. All those companies are in a very small community located at the sea and have residuals and had that for a long, long time. Those residuals were then transported by truck to a biogas plant somewhere in Sweden. Now, instead of taking that by truck, some very good engineers, they thought that these residuals we can do something better of. So I've been in this industry and I've been in this coastal community since 2003 in different companies. So I know when it started because I was supposed to sign the document that enabled the let's say the founding of this this idea. So the idea was to take the secondary process residuals, which would be sprats for the ABBA production. It could be wastewater from caviar and frozen food in Marinor, and also then from the salmon production. And to bring that into this industrial complex, purifying the processing water, so instead of having the community network funding and having costs on purifying food water, we could then enable a value on that residuals, creating biogas. So instead of those companies buying propane gas, they can use the biogas locally to heat their plants. Of course, electricity, and then also they are having fertilizer. So if you go to the plantation store, I think you can buy some small bottles with Bengt's fertilizer. And then if you buy it, you will know it's sprats and residuals from the Sotenes. Very nice. So from a cost and then a situation from this little coastal community bearing this enormous water treatment complexity into value creation. And then also going forward, by having this plant, we can then increase production in this coastal community without having pollution in the oceans. And also then enables, let's say, reduce the threshold for investing more in those 4 companies, because it's creating value. So it's not only doing it for now, it's also creating something for the future. So this is a fantastic case study. But does this only happen by a coincidence? No, it does not. So in the article, we mentioned industrial clusters. And we know in Sweden how important industrial clusters are. I do not think that we would have Scania trucks, Volvo, or SKF if we do not have the iron mills in the mid and north of Sweden. It all starts with something. So the industrial clusters ensure that there is a foundation and understanding of a certain sector which you can then develop. So these 3 founders of this Rena Hav are all former employees of these 4 companies. They all have a deep understanding of the processing of seafood. Without that, it would only be an idea. But with that cluster of the industrial platform and the volumes, and the insight and knowledge that these people gained during their 20 years in the business, they formed in something that they can then create some value from. And I think that's really important for Sweden, and it's important for the blue economy of Sweden going forward. How do we create industrial clusters that build innovation stepwise over time? It is very easy to apply for contribution from the public, but if you don't have the industrial clusters in place and the industrial platform and capacity and volume, then it's very difficult to be leading. And you need to be leading if you want to change the world. So we stress that. And then going to what Sweden needs to do more. And when we wrote the article, the government had not launched the Food Strategy 2.0. Have you read the strategy 2.0, Sweden Food Strategy 2.0. Can you see there is a blue economy part in it? It's the first time ever. And in that Food Strategy 2.0, actually, what we wrote here, Sweden needs to do is in the strategy. So if we just ensure that we can enable and complete that strategy, we will then ensure that we focus on value creation of the resource. So if we would have been in the wood sector, like Ivar said, we would know if we have cut down all the trees in Sweden, yes? But because we are in the ocean, we for a long, long time thought that fish and the ecosystems of the ocean are endless. We can just take more out. That has changed. So instead of focusing on kilos brought to the ocean, we need to focus on the value creation of the kilos of resource that we have, of the wild fish. Then we need to strengthen, of course, the link between then the fishing operation and the processing. And for those who works in Africa, I'm absolutely sure that's vital in Africa, because there you have very structural change at the moment with bigger boats, where the coastal fleets are depleted and bigger boats are coming in. And of course, by that, the geographical opportunity to transport that fish to other sectors of the world is much higher than before. And then, therefore, the link between fishing operation and processing is fundamental to get a blue economy in place, so also for Sweden.
Krishan.
Oh, I need to finish. Yes.
Yes.
Aquaculture in Sweden has a great potential. So we need to simplify regulations, and that's also in the food structure, in the food strategy. Fantastic. And then we need to find these concentrated geographical industrial clusters, because they provide innovation and platforms. And then we need to share good practices, not only within Sweden, but mainly with other countries that have the similar structure as we do. So we have the Baltic countries, Finland, Poland, Germany, and Denmark, for example. Thank you.
Lovely, Krishan. Here we have the goldfish man. Ingrid, welcome. Den går på automatiskt. Mm. Hon har full koll här. Säg vilket nummer det är på den.
Okej, ja, bra. Tack. Thank you for inviting us to introduce our chapter. It deals with the prospects for a sustainable bio-based economy in the East African drylands, where we focus on landscapes, livestock, and livelihoods in transition. So welcome to join me here with this family herding their sheep and cattle somewhere in maybe northwest Kenya, I would think. Take the next one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So why did we focus on drylands? Yes, drylands actually cover 40% of the global area, land area, and in Africa it covers 43%. It's huge areas. It might not be the most productive areas, but they are huge. They host quite a lot of people, and they support at least half of the livestock globally. And if you look at the African side to the right here, it's hosting quite many agropastoralists and pastoralists. And those are the people we are working with. These areas are having a number of challenges, as we have everywhere, but they are sort of accentuated in the drylands. It's about climate change. It's about pressure and competing land uses. So there might be, also population increase there, but it's also many other actors who wants to use the land, which creating difficulties for the pastoral communities, which can be about conservation areas, mining areas, energy sources, various infrastructures. And these things are affecting the migration the traditional migration, making people having to change, and also causing conflicts, traditional conflicts and new conflicts. So we got the opportunity to apply for funding from Formas in 2019. It was a call about the Sustainable Development Goals and synergies and trade-offs. And we thought, where, if not in the East African drylands, can we test the synergies and trade-offs? And this is the conceptual framework of our work, which started with a project which I'm leading called Drylands Transform. And I will say a bit more about that later. So the conceptual framework here, is this the pointer? No. Okay. Yeah, okay, it is, yes. So this is sort of the degraded side of the system, we can say, where we have reduced well-being and human well-being and livelihoods, we have unsustainable land use, we have land degradation, we have reduced ecosystem services, and both at the very local level and district province level, we also have weak institutions, weak governance, conflicts, inequity, and so on. So that's sort of a little bit a negative spiral where we usually think that we are in the drylands. And when we look at sort of the change and the possible change and transformation, which we think can be structural, systemic, or enabling, we go into the right-hand side, like the green cycle up there. We are looking at governance, land management, and value chain development. So it's about social, ecological, and economic sustainable development. And where we work together with different actors from very local communities, villages, elders, to the different government levels, and up to IGAD, the Intergovernmental Organization for the Horn of Africa, that actually also an active partner in our project. So examples of what we do and work with is sustainable intensification of livestock and crop production. And as you could see before, and as we have been seeing in our different surveys, most people are dealing both with crops and livestock. Even if they identify themselves as pastoralists, they also are doing a bit of cropping and vegetable production, settle down a little bit more than maybe people traditional things, and would like to do so in our scenario work, even if they also would like to have their migratory routes, but not go with all the family with everything, but doing it like in a practical way when needed for grazing. So here you see examples of what we are working with for quite simple maybe, but essential things like water harvesting, nutrient management, forage and tree production. But the thing is, like, how do we do that and where? Take the next. Yeah, so we have engagements landscapes in Karamoja, which is this boundary region here between Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. And our engagement sites are in Kenya and Uganda, just where people are interacting across the border. And so do we with scientists and practitioners from both sides. And we can say that the two of the sites are more pastoral and they are more agro-pastoral. And you can see on the colors that some are drier than others. The next. Yeah. And the modality, so the way we collaborate is around what we call livestock cafes. Some people think, especially veterinaries, that we bring livestock together and they go there and infect each other. No, it's not what we do, but it's like knowledge sharing hubs where people meet and engage around livestock production. So as you can see here, people are meeting. This is in the livestock cafe. It's a hay barn part of the year, but now it's a training center, discussion center. Here people are working with digging ditches for water harvesting, but also filling up with material for vegetable production. We've also had a lot of, I wonder what's happened there. I'm sorry. Yeah, and we also have had growing a lot of grasses and forages. People are harvesting here because we will introduce fattening of livestock. I mean, they go out grazing in the day, but it's very unsecure in the night. So they take them home to the village, and then some of them will be extra fed with hay to like illustrate that fattening of livestock can be a useful thing, an economic thing to do before selling them or slaughtering them. Up here, you can see a boundary, and that is between the livestock cafe is in here. And this is just 1 year after we established the livestock cafe. So this house is like at the end. And here are different grass strips. There are different like half moons that have been filled with materials and then with reseeded. It's dry season, so you might not see that, but it's actually when it's green, a lot of grasses. So it's quite quick to start to restore the area and then making it possible to harvest the hay. So apart from all these activities related to grass, forage, planting trees with the livestock production, I also mentioned the kitchen gardens. It's partly a tradition, but not for everyone. So the thing is to see how to harvest water, how to add nutrients and plant vegetables that can also live during the dry season. And we thought that people primarily should do this for food production. But then when our students have been studying, they also sell quite a lot because even a small income is very needed in parts of the year. And for those who manage the water, they can avoid what someone talked about, where people were saying that everybody get the yield at the same time. Those who really manage to grow in the dry season have been very successful. Yeah, the last one, I think. Yes. So how can we do this? And why do we say this is coming out of Sweden when we work with so many partners? Yeah, we call it the LLL, Land Livestock Livelihoods Initiative. We started to work together in 2013 based on an interest in working in this area with a little bit various funding sources with Gert Nyberg as the initiator. And then in 2019, we applied for this Dry Lands Transform from Formas and were successful. And a couple of years later, in 2023, another call came, which is the National Research Program for Water, Climate Change and Biodiversity. And we got Restore for More, still working in the same livestock cafes, but with new PhD students, master students, and some more partners, among them via Agroforestry, via Skogen, who help with sort of the scaling. And now finally this year include to Restore, funded by the Canadians. And there is more the social and economic innovations and development that are studied. Yeah. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to discuss more.
Thank you, Ingrid. Indeed, in this area in southwest Kenya, actually the background
Northwest.
Northwest, sorry. The background was activities by VI Agroforestry already in 1989 and onwards. So, I mean, this is a long transition of Swedish involvement. Really interesting. Finally, Thijs, what are your reflections? How do you see this from the FAO horizon?
Can I speak from here?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I think I came here many years ago to the same auditorium also to speak about bioeconomy, which already shows the collaboration between FAO and Sweden on forest approaches to the bioeconomy. I think that it's important to frame my intervention on within the FAO strategic framework 2022 to 2031, because this strategic framework brings, first of all, a more integrated approach between production, environment, conservation. To a certain extent, it helped us to rehabilitate this thinking on production within the forestry division. So it's very important to understand that we are in a very good moment. We have an opportunity now to advance this work because we do have a priority program, which is bioeconomy under the pillar or strategic framework. For those who are not familiar, has 4 pillars: better life, better nutrition, better production, and better environment. So the bioeconomy program is a priority area under better environment, but it's also supported by a priority program, a priority area under the better production, which is green innovation. So these two programs, they go hand in hand, and they create this possibility to advance bioeconomy approach, not only from this pure bioeconomy thinking, but bringing the innovation and understanding that sustainable production, understanding that getting smallholders, getting the small producers, getting SMEs part of this approach is one of the goals that we need to pursue. So we're talking here about advancing sustainable value chains, which is work that FAO has been doing, in particular in agriculture, for a long time. I must say that as an economist, I haven't worked on development issues. I have been leading the value chain work in the forestry division, and I must say how this is now widely recognized in the division and also within the FAO framework that forestry has substantive value chain work. And in association with the concepts of innovation, material efficiency, circularity in forestry, which was not, I think, until perhaps 10, 8 years ago, not mainstreamed, I think, as part of forestry. I want to congratulate the authors of the report. It's a very good report, and it points out that bioeconomy is one area where certainly among many other areas, but I must say that bioeconomy is an area where Sweden has a very strong role to play. And this role to play is not only because of the state of development of the Swedish industry. We know about pulp and paper, we know about furniture, we know about the biorefineries, etc. But what is really important, and it's something that the report kind of touches upon, is that Sweden understands forestry development. So it's not only about forest as a resource base, it's about using forests and their peoples as a driver also of sustainable development. And this is very important. Very few countries have this perception of this holistic role that forests actually play in our global development agenda. So Sweden historically has supported the national forest programs, which are a fantastic tool to identify national forest priorities and support coherent policy making. Sida has supported the Forest and Farm Facility, which has been instrumental to show that smallholders are a critical piece of agri-food systems, but also that on the ground, there is no such an antagonism between forestry and agriculture. So, and rather there is a complementarity. And I must say that since we created this initiative, Sustainable Wood for a Sustainable World, that is a joint initiative of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests led by FAO, Sweden has been very supported technically, and we have created a lot of exchanges, and we have benefited a lot from these exchanges. So I would say that this collaboration can certainly be enhanced because, as the report shows, there is an open field for us to really, that can fructify. And the publication actually points out the areas where we can work together. So one, as I mentioned, is to restore the vision of forest development, which goes beyond the fragmented approach of carbon, land restoration, biodiversity, deforestation, etc. The second, and I really loved it to have it as a subtitle, because as an economist, this is my mantra, if forests do not have local value, they won't survive. So understanding that forest production is what is the fundamental incentive to keep forests standing, it's essential. And it should be obvious, but it's not obvious. So working with forest producers, working with landholders, and bringing them to understand that it's possible to have sustainable forestry, and that sustainable forestry is either a good complement to their income or can become their main income. It's essential for us to keep standing forests and therefore have successful restoration and conservation strategies. As we are talking about FAO, as you know, our challenge in FAO is to take our approach, and take in this case bioeconomy approach, to the global south in a way that we go beyond value addition, and that it's a very important, I think, understanding that we're talking about bioeconomy. So it's not only about the production, but it is about bringing the material efficiency, circularity, cascading approach, and fostering local and global solutions. This is where, that's why we have two priority programs, bioeconomy and green innovation, but the two should go hand in hand. And when talking to countries, it's very important that we can establish a forest development or a forest production, in particular when we talk about wood, that is rather different from the business as usual, in the sense that we will have this focus on circularity, on cascading, and that we can have a systems approach associated to that. From our perspective, wood is perfectly suited material for bioeconomy approach, and that's why we have been working so strongly promoting these sustainable wood value chains. But it faces a lot of concerns and prejudice. So let's leave the prejudice apart, because those who need to deal with them through awareness campaigns and trying to build in the case, but focusing on the concerns. They are mostly regarding the resource base, biodiversity, and social inclusion. And in FAO, we are working to produce outlook studies and investing in support of diversified production systems to sustainably increase the resource base. On biodiversity, we need to invest more in deploying the technologies on processing of lesser known species and silviculture of native species. In the same way that there is work in Europe to produce CLT with hardwood, we can do similar work in the tropics. Efficient and competitive production from agroforestry is also needed. We cannot advance the bioeconomy solely based on industrial plantations. So we need to really develop a range of production systems that can contribute to the resource base. Finally, we also need to continue to promote forestry as part of bioeconomy strategies and policies globally and nationally. So it's in many countries we are able to advance with bioeconomy strategies and policies, but very often there is a resistance to include forestry as part of it. And this is work that we need to do. For us in FAO, the low-hanging fruit is the construction sector, where engineered wood products and adopting a concept that we labeled forest-positive buildings make wood in construction work for greening the building sector, address housing needs, and contributing to a larger and healthier forest cover in an inclusive and sustainable way. So we want to have the recognition of wood as a nature-based solution, and we believe that the wood, in particular, the engineered wood products being used in the construction sector is the best or the most approachable way forward now. A global partnership on bioeconomy is in discussion in FAO. For those participating of FAO's discussions, you know about that. It will probably be presented to the FAO Council in the second half of the year. And in 2026, we do have a new meeting of the Committee of Forestry, and we were looking forward to, together with Sweden, strengthen the work on bioeconomy and forestry for the next work program, and in the field and through our governance instruments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thijs, for the FAO perspective, and I'm also happy to hear the forestry perspective as well here. We have very little time for discussion, but of course we can discuss all through the informally through the coffee break. But are there one real question or one virtual question? No virtual? Yes, please. Please stand up and say your name.
Hi, my name is Caroline Delgado. I'm at the SIPRI, Stockholm Financial Peace Research Institute. I have a specific question to Ingrid. Thank you very much for your presentation. And I wanted to ask you, you implied in your conceptual framework that there's a connection between conflict, livelihoods, and peace. And I just wanted to ask you if you looked into that connection in your project, and if so, if you could just share some of your immediate reflections or insights on that relationship.
Yes. So it's the Institute of Global Studies at Gothenburg University that have been leading that part. Yeah, so the thing is to try to understand how the land governance system can be set up, both to ensure sort of the right for the families for some sort of private land or land that can be used for private grazing or cultivation, and at the same time ensure the flexibility with the migration corridors. So not like have one system, but how to combine the community and the individual sort of in the modern fashion. That is really very much where we are. The conflicts are quite sort of complex. It's easy to blame the pastoralists for going into each other's land, but we can see it's far more advanced than that. And even the national governments sending military, trying to like teach people what to do and not. It's a lot of various things. So we cannot say so much about that, but it's complex. But there are also solutions being discussed, and it's very important also to have the bottom-up approach, not only the top-down. And we have fed back into the governments of Kenya and Uganda and got very good sort of feedback that we actually have managed to establish links and worked for so long time in conflict areas where other people don't think you can work or go to. So I think we are on the right track, but we do it slowly by slowly.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, so Annika again from Sida. Thank you for the presentation. I'm also a bit curious about the solutions in that part of Uganda, Kenya, considering the Al-Shabaab activities, but also the conflicts, which is not driven by the local context, but by the national, also politics, but also the owners of the cattle. I mean, the cattle owners normally do not belong to the local people have few cows. People living in Nairobi, they have thousands and thousands of cows, and they're very interested in keeping them in that area. So I think those dynamics is also what we need to talk about, the local national perspective and the triangulation we also with what can the global community do to support solutions, perhaps with not only with research, but with, mediation and alternative production, but also the way people, of course, live. It's normally not that sustainable to have 6 wives and 47 kids, which many of the people I met had. So in the combination with many cows, it creates an intense impact on the degradation of that land. So I think it's, we need to bring on board the way people do things and politics at headquarters and the government.
I mean, very quickly, it doesn't seem to be as many livestock as people think, or maybe that it used to be. It's smaller numbers, but I agree, it's complex. And when we work with scenarios from everything from villages and all the way up, we work with one called Renewed Pastoralist, and the other one is Innovative Agropastoralist. Most people actually, even the pastoralists up there, would like to go more for what they call the innovative agropastoralist, which allows some migration, but still settle down, which would be better for schools, healthcare, and many of the family issues you raise. So this seems to be actually the mindset at all levels. We were surprised, but yeah, we're still working on that.
Thank you. I think we need to break there. I'll just like to send a teaser into the coffee break. You know, most of Sweden's fishery goes to fish meal. A lot of the world's former forest areas are used for a wonderful commodity of palm oil. But you know, there's just the palm oil, and it's more lucrative than doing sustainable forestry. How can we better come into this innovative agropastoralism? What are the innovations we need to really find a local value that drives development in the rural areas? Suck on that for a while.
Yeah, and you have to come in here when you hear that. Tack så mycket.
Sahii wacha tu saizi roho nataka, lakini mfuko ninasema wewe. Niko tu sawa tu. Nisema tulipita, lakini watu wanaongea.
In i rummet och sätta er ner.
Shh.
I'm talking in Swedish, I realize. That's interesting. Well, we are in Sweden, so that's why. Okay, welcome back after the coffee break. We are now going into the third session, and in this session we have one panelist from Rome, Maximo Torero. He's on the screen here for us, and my name is Rolf Brennefelt, who is welcoming you here. And I will give you the floor. You are chief economist in FAO, and after your speech or introduction, we will hopefully have some questions from the floor here and from the people online, and we will have a discussion together. Please, the floor is yours.
No, thank you so much, and deep apologies I couldn't be with you today. Let me share the presentation I am planning to do so that we can go over it. So what I'm going to talk today is about 50 years with FAO and the state of global food, but looking at security and food security and nutrition, and especially on advancing food security resilience, and trying to look at the evolution of the situation where we are today and where we are moving forward, with some emphasis on the importance of youth in all these aspects. So first, if we look at the today and the situation where we are today, it is important to know that the numbers don't look too good. First, the numbers of hunger are 733 million people in the midpoint, because now we normally publish interval of confidence. So 733 million people which are chronic hunger in 2023. This was the SOFI of 2024. We are publishing at the end of July in the Food System Summit +4, the SOFI 2025. Food insecure people, 2.3 billion people that lack regular access to food, 2.8 billion people that don't have access to healthy diets, and 295.3 million people which are in acute food insecurity, according to the last food crisis report that was jointly published with WFP and other partners a couple of weeks ago. Now, all these numbers are under a system where we have three key drivers: conflicts, which are increasing; climate, especially when we are looking at 5 implications of climate: extreme temperatures, lack of water or excess of water, variability of the climate indicators, which makes more difficult for farmers to make decisions, pests and diseases, which are evolving with climate change, and migration of human beings and migration of species. And of course, the macroeconomic side and the economic crisis, where we face significant amount of countries facing debt stress. Specifically, if we look at the short-term measure of acute food insecurity, the 295 million people, most of them are in Africa, and most of the countries that are facing debt stress are in Africa too, which puts a significant challenge. So these three drivers together with economic inequalities, are accelerating this process and creating the complexities we're facing. Now, when we look at the youth specifically, which I think there is a panel after this talking at the youth issue, globally, almost 1 in 4 youth experience food insecurity. This is still to come. This is the report of youth in the agri-food systems. So I will appreciate not to be cited what I am presenting here, but just wanted to give you some light on that. So moderate or severe food insecurity has increased more rapidly among youth, resulting in 3 percentage points age gap compared to the adults. So 24.4% versus 21.5% between 2021 and 2023. And the highest prevalence of youth food insecurity is found in Africa, 43%, where we know a significant share of the population is youth. There are poor dietary partners with inadequate nutrient intake, which contribute to dietary deficiencies. And typically, the youth diets are characterized by low consumption of fruits and vegetables. So that's the situation in terms of the youth. And this also, of course, is reflected in the share of the population in the youth cohort age, which is the biggest in Africa at this point. Now, when we look at the hunger numbers, and we project the hunger numbers, the 733 million to 2030, which is the target of the SG2, we see that in the current conditions, we should be in around 581.7 million by 2030. This is 130 million more than what we would have if COVID-19 didn't happen. So the COVID-19 had an effect of 130 million more people. So the expectation is that in the future, we will see this to accelerate more and to converge more, but still is far from the target of zero hunger that we're expecting. Even if we split this by region at this point in absolute numbers, the only region that could achieve 2030 SG2 is Latin America, especially South America. Asia will improve substantially, but won't be able to reach the target. And Africa, on the contrary, hunger is increasing. So that's the focus for today and also for the future, which of course we will update in the next SOFI that will come end of July. Now, one topic that today is so relevant is the issue of food inflation. And here we need to understand the different concepts that we use when we talk about this topic. FAO reports the FAO Food Price Index, and these are commodity prices. These are the price of wheat, of maize, of soybeans, of milk, are the specific commodities. But what you consume in the market is something that has other elements, has value added, like bread. And in bread, for example, only 1 to 2% of it is because of wheat. The rest could be because of energy, other inputs that are used in the process of producing the bread. And that's what is called food. So when we refer to food inflation, we are referring to the food that we consume in the retail stores, in the supermarkets, in the wholesale markets. So if you look at the food price index, which is the blue line, we see that there was a significant increase, of course, after COVID-19 and an exacerbation because of the war in Ukraine. And then the prices of the international commodity prices started to reduce significantly around the world. But on the contrary, when we look at the red lines, the food CPI and the headline CPI, we see that the food prices increase more than other goods in the economy. So the headline CPI is the overall inflation, and the food CPI is even higher. So the dotted red line is the head CPI. The food inflation is the solid red line. So food prices increase more than other goods in the economy, and food inflation has shown more signals of resilience, but this is still high. So there is some slight reduction in the increase rate, but it still is high relative compared to what are the commodity prices. So the transmission of the reduction has not yet passed to the prices of the final food goods. And that's because other elements of the food goods are not declining. And this is even worse in the low-income countries, which is what we observe here. If we compare the food inflation in low-income countries with high-income countries, we see that the food inflation continues to be high. There is starting to be a decline, but at a lower rate than in high-income countries, relative to the headline CPI, so to the overall inflation. And that, of course, creates a stress over the households, a stress over the import bills of countries. And that's why the food import bill has been increasing. And in the case of high-income countries, they can afford it, so the bill increases in value. In the case of low and lower middle-income countries, they cannot necessarily afford it, especially if they're in that distress. And as a result of that, they have two options. They import less, or they import less quality of food, which of course has a consequence over non-communicable diseases because it could end in more starchy food and less healthy diets for people to be able to access to the market. Now, food inflation is one of the biggest concerns in people's mind. You have seen has happened in many elections. Food inflation has become a significant problem in people's mind. But also food inflation has a direct link with food insecurity, and this is related also to income countries. If you look at the graphs in the top, the low-income countries and the lower middle-income countries, you will see that the indicator of food insecurity, the blue line, the moderate or severe food insecurity, has been increasing very highly correlated with the red line, which is the food CPI. That's not the case in the case of upper middle income countries and high income countries, where they can cope and they are more resilient to be able to cope with this. And as a result, their impact is lower. Now, another issue which is important and which is extremely important in these days is the fact that we have surpassed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. As a result of that, the consequence of this is that the biophysical dynamics are not linear anymore, and the speed of problems are increasing, meaning in exponential ways. And that means that the system have tipping points. And this could mean that our structure of modeling, our capacity has to change dramatically, because the frequency and intensity of the climate events will increase. So if we need to know something in advance, is that for sure, no matter what we do in the next years, this frequency and intensity of climate events will increase. Despite, for example, if we start to reduce emissions coming from the agri-food system and we try to be more compatible with lower emissions to minimize potential effects of climate change. But in the following years, we won't be able to see that. It could be later on we see the improvement. But in the following years, what we expect anyway, whatever we do, is an increase in intensity and frequency of climate events. And that's where it's so important that we need to be prepared and resilient to this type of events, which we know will be happening. So if we look at the whole food supply chain, as I said before, nearly 30% of the global population, 2.8 billion people, did not have regular access to healthy diets in 2020. Global food consumption is projected to increase 1.4% per annum over the next decade. So there will be an increase in consumption. And we need to be prepared for that. That means that we need to increase production. We need to produce more with less to be able to reduce the levels of hunger in the world. But also, at the same time, 30.2% of the world agricultural production is lost, and 17%, according to NEP, is wasted, which is a contradiction to the fact that we need to use more food, and it's a contradiction to the fact that the population and the demand is increasing over time. And when we look at the diet-related cost of current agri-food systems, the greenhouse emissions are projected to increase 1.7 trillion per year by 2030. Again, that's an externality that if we look at the system, the agri-food system is creating. So despite the good result of the agri-food system, which is providing food and to achieve the right to food and to reduce hunger, it also creates something negative, which is the externalities. And one of those is greenhouse gas emissions. Also, more than half of the global GDP depends on nature, and it is therefore exposed to biodiversity loss. The world has already lost an estimated of $6 to $12 trillion per year just from land degradation. And the extraction of natural resources has tripled in the past 15 years. And today, if we look at the true cost accounting, which is the exercise we did in the last two SOFAs, we're talking of $12 trillion per year, more than 10% of the global GDP due to productivity loss associated with the agri-food system. That means the three components of the true cost accounting, which are environmental, health, and social related. So again, we have an agri-food system that needs to adjust, need to be able to minimize those externalities, because it's essential that we achieve the right to food. So those two goals have to be there. We have to have the goal of assuring that we have food available, producing more with less, but we also need to look at the sustainability so that tomorrow we can also have access to food. That's why our motto is good food for all, for today and tomorrow. Now, all this has cost associated to it. We have done several exercises. There are other partners that have done several exercises in trying to look at the whole system and trying to see what will be the implications of trying to achieve these two goals at the same time. The latest work we did with David Laborde was using modeling to try to assume across the agri-food system what this will imply. And there we are referring to around $4 trillion per annum that needs to be increased to be able to achieve all those goals at the same time. But if we just focus on the cost of ending hunger, so purely two of the indicators of the SDG 2, we are talking of an additional spending of around 500 billion more, largely associated to social transfers to be able to achieve that goal. Now, that has increased from our previous estimates in CERES 2030 of 330 million, which means that the cost of inaction since then has been significant, and this has more or less increased in 200 billion more because of the cost of inaction. So there is an important problem of not doing things when they are supposed to be done, and that's one of the challenges that we need to clearly resolve to be able to achieve at least these two indicators of the SDG 2. So the question now, and where I think we need to open our discussion, is what we need to do. And here is where our position is to try to look more at the agri-food system and trying to make the agri-food system more resilient, more efficient, and more inclusive. Why more resilient? Because we know that we will have to cope with all these shocks related to climate events, to this increasing frequency and intensity of climate events. But also, of course, we need to look at ways in which we can cope with other risks and trying to minimize the impacts of those risks, the risks linked to microeconomic drivers or even linked to conflict. And for that, we need to have a system which is more efficient because also we want to assure this sustainability over time. Focusing on the first element of resilience and how we cope with resilience. Resilience has two major components that we are looking at very carefully. One is minimize the risks, that's being preventive. Basically to have early warning systems in place, to implement the One Health approach, and to increase access to insurance mechanisms, because that will allow us to be preventive to the problem. But then there is the second component, which is coping with the risk when they occur. And that's our capacity to be able to cope that risk no matter it will happen. So the preventive will allow us to prepare in advance. But once the shock happens, once the drought happens, despite I have been preparing in advance, I have an insurance in place in advance, I need to have a capacity of absorption. And the capacity of absorption goes from the extreme of the distribution touching the most vulnerable, that's, for example, social protection programs, to also increase capacity of absorption in terms of production. For example, to produce and bring science, to produce with seeds which are more resistant to extreme temperatures or resistant to flood, or to be able to have more partners or trade partners that will allow us to increase our resilience, because if something happens to my local production, I can access markets to be able to minimize those risks. So that's what we mean by this second component of the resilience. So two components, minimize risk, and the second, to cope with the risks when they occur. Let me focus briefly on the first component and how we can handle that. So the first component is more linked to emergency work and also to what we need to do to avoid always falling into emergency situations. And in this figure, what I am trying is to try to push the concept that we're trying to do. Normally, when you have the red dotted line, which is the shock, we can have emergency response, which could be immediate, or it will take some time. And that's over the time. The goal and what we want to do is trying to move backwards and trying to be able to have a predictive power of the potential shock that happened. So, for example, if I can predict El Niño, I can predict La Niña, I can invest before it happens to clean the rivers and so on and so forth. I will minimize the impact of that shock. I know it will come, but I can predict and I can therefore be prepared 1 month, 60 days in advance. Even when a cyclone touches, I know when it will touch, therefore I can deliver cash, for example, and there is evidence of the impact of that. That's what we called minimizing the risk, coping the risk when they occur, and that's what we call, of course, anticipatory action. So the goal is how much I can predict these shocks and how much capacity I will have to predict these shocks to minimize the potential impacts over my households once the shock happens. And what we are doing here is we are developing a situation room that will be launched during the conference in FAO in July, where basically we're bringing 12 risks and trying to show some predictive power on those 12 risks. And the hope is also to reinsure them. So the T3 to 6 and T greater than 6 means before the shock happens. For example, in locusts, we can now predict even 3 months before the shock happening. In extreme temperatures, 30 days to 45 days. So there are technology today with the data available that will allow us to do that. And what we know is that the anticipatory action has a payout of 1 to 7. So every dollar I invest, I get 7. Even if I can insure some of those climatic shocks, I can increase my coverage by 10. So the business case is very clear of what we can get there and how we can minimize the shocks. And for that, we have launched in the G7 the financing for shock-driven food crisis facility, which is exactly doing what I was trying to explain, mobilize resources at the right time at the velocity which is needed for anticipatory action, and also trying to reduce the cost to taxpayers by bringing private investment through the reinsurance companies and increase the efficiency and the impact of the interventions. And for that, we have developed what we call the resilience toolbox, which we are publishing very soon, where we try to improve the quality of the different types of interventions for this type of anticipatory action. The facility that we're launching will have an insurance backstop, a cash layer for the risks that are not insurable, and of course, we will be able to measure the exposures, and we will be able to measure the vulnerabilities. The insurable risks are drought, tropical cyclones, excess precipitation, flood, earthquake, and pandemics. And the uninsurable risks are teleconnections, heatwave, volcano, conflict, locust, and political risk. So here we're working with partners to measure conflict, for example, and we're working with partners on all the different risks which we will be launching in the situation room. And of course, FAO has the capacity to measure vulnerabilities and exposures. Now, the second component is of this response on resilience is how we can make this system more efficient and inclusive. And very briefly, here there are three elements that we need to look at. First is data, science, and evidence, and state-of-the-art analytical tools. And here is where bioeconomy, for example, could play a crucial role. Second is operational solutions at the global and regional and local scale level. So this is the right institutionality and contextualization. And of course, the governance and institutional arrangements. And there is a lot of evidence that we know. So for example, when we try to see what are the interventions that will minimize or increase the marginal return in terms of undernourishment or hunger, we know in this graph, in the horizontal axis, you have the number of undernourished people being touched, and in the vertical axis, you have the intervention cost per undernourished people. So what we know here is that the ICT interventions in the short term, these are for short-term impact, are the ones that give the biggest payout, school feeding programs, emergency response, and especially when we talk about anticipatory. When we look at more the medium term, here is where agricultural extension services play a big role, agricultural research and development, and also ICT digital technologies. So digital technologies, both in the short and in the medium term, could play a role to increase efficiency, but clearly in the long term, research and development is something that is so important because that's what will allow us to have these varieties that are so important to be able to develop. But digital technologies complement with all this and give us a huge opportunity to be able to cope with this type of problem. So this is the type of analysis that we can do today that help us to target interventions and to identify interventions. Now, and just to finalize, it's important to understand that the youth will have to play a crucial role here because 85% of the global youth population especially resides in low-income countries, and that's where countries with more traditional agri-food systems will have large youth budgets over the next 20 years. So agri-food systems can play a critical role to providing employment and food to the growing youth population. And countries with more formalized agri-food systems have low shares of rural youth, and that's the developed countries. So youth will play a crucial role in this process, and we need to find ways to bring them into the system, and that's why where digital technologies can play an important role in this respect. And despite the urbanization, the rural areas contain 46% of the global youth population. So again, in Africa, for example, 65% of youth in sub-Saharan Africa are in rural areas, and that's the largest group in peri-rural. So a lot of work to be done to try to bring these innovations like the digital technologies or the science innovations that will attract also youth into this sector of the agri-food system and the transformation that we're looking for. And finally, it's important to understand that we need to have coordination. We cannot operate at silos, and that's the system approach. We have to look at cross sectors, across ministries, depending on what we want to target and how we want to target the two major objectives, which is SDG 2 and making sustainable so that we have good food for all for today and tomorrow. But we also need to coordinate across different levels of governments. And that's what will help us to achieve both of them. Now, but there are issues which are global. Climate issues of greenhouse gas emissions are a global issue. And there are issues that are local, like my soil, my water availability, and how much food I produce. So we need to combine both, and that's where the just transition and the roadmap that we develop helps in that process to understand how we need to improve efficiency on one side, but also we need to look at global rebalances. Because in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, there are countries that are over-consuming certain goods that are creating more emissions and others that are under-consuming those goods. So this global rebalancing with the efficiency gains is what we're looking for, and for that we need to bring as much science and evidence to be able to achieve that. Because what we want at the end, if you look at this graph, is we want to provide good food for all for today and tomorrow. But that will require that we need to eradicate hunger. And here, if you look at the green dotted line, we are targeting the 2030, which is the reduction of hunger, assuming that we achieve the SDG 2. But we also need to improve access to healthy diets. Here we are putting until 2050. And how many people consume those healthy diets, because it's not just the issue of making them affordable, it's also the behavioral change. But to be assured that this will work tomorrow, we also need to make the agri-food systems carbon sink. And that's why the dotted grid line shows how much we need to reduce and make it carbon sink so that we can achieve both goals, the access to food and at the same time the sustainability over time, assuming that we achieve the hunger goal in 2030 and the access to healthy diets in 2050. So let me stop there and thank you so much. But that's the complexity that we are facing today, of course, in addition to the political tensions that we're having to face today and for which we are working very closely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Torero. I will now leave the floor open here in Stockholm and online for questions to you. No. Do we have something online? No. Yeah. Please.
Yeah. I'm Ingrid Öborn from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Yes, I had one question. You had the curve where you showed like COVID and what COVID had done to like how the trajectory became. I mean, how much is it COVID and how much is it all other like happenings in the world that have happened also during these last 5 years? Can you separate that?
What we did, no? So if you look at the graph I show, basically what we are saying is that this gap of 130 million is exclusively because of COVID. So when we simulate this, we can isolate the impact of COVID, and that's the 130 million. So if we project to 2030, we'll have been today, based on the SOFI 2024, in 451.8 million. But because of COVID, we are in 581.7 million. All the other impacts are coming, of course, in the absolute number, no?
Okay, thank you. Someone else? I didn't. Yes. If you stand up, I think we hear you better.
Lars Lestadius, forestry consultant. You spoke about the youth bulge in the countryside, but you also spoke about the need of making agriculture more efficient. So if that means less people per unit produced, then is the question, what sort of activity will engage this youth bulge in the countryside and keep it from moving to the cities?
No, thank you so much for the question. I specifically refer to efficiency in terms of all the different factors of production. No? So it's not only labor, but it's also soil, land, and water. So the efficiency I was referring to is to specifically to natural resources. But in the case of labor, as you know, agriculture, especially in low and low middle income countries, is aging, and the youth population is moving out of that sector. And that's problematic because if we want to use state-of-the-art technologies, we want to use digital technologies and so on, it's more difficult and more complex to be able to work with aging populations that they don't know how to read and write necessarily and have not gone through primary and secondary education. So the point is how we can make this sector attractive, that despite we increase youth labor into the sector, we will keep increasing efficiency by the use of technologies and adoption better technologies, more efficient technologies. So the hope is that the total factor productivity will improve despite of the absorption of youth labor into it. But that will require to basically create the skill sets and also create the demand on the agricultural sector. I can give you one very nice example, which is in my own country in Peru. If you go to Peru 10 years ago, Peru was not a net exporter of food, high-value commodities. Today, Peru is a huge exporter of high-value commodities. Most of the sparrows, I assume you eat, or other types of high-value commodities come from this country around the world. And this has created a technification of agriculture in the coast of Peru, not yet in the high altitude of Peru. And it has attracted a significant amount of labor force of youth. So the profession, which is the best paid today in Peru, is the agribusiness. Is one of the highest salaries. So it has made it extremely attractive for the agricultural sector. We have full employment in the coast in terms of agricultural sector, which has created this new pillar of growth, but we are super efficient, and that's why we can export to international markets. And we have beaten most of the exporters of avocados and sparrows in the world in that sense.
Thank you. We had one more question here. Yes.
Krishan Kent, Sweden Seafood Association. I'd like to acknowledge and stress the importance and vital work that your FAO do on the papers showing the value creation opportunities, for example, in relation to the fishing, let's say the increasing value opportunities in fishing without taking out more resource, taking out more value and more nutrition by kilo. And thank you very much for that, and I hope you will continue those.
No, thank you so much. And there is a big push that we are giving to fisheries and aquaculture, no? Because the input to output ratio is super efficient relative to other types of protein. So I think that's something that the Director General has been pursuing intensively, and it's something that we will continue pursuing across both fishery and aquaculture.
Thank you. We have a final question online or two.
From Inge, Gerremo online. What role would you say an improved food production as a basis for economic development in Africa would have on today's and tomorrow's migration to Europe?
Thank you. So look, one of the things that we have noticed is that the productivity levels, the total factor productivity of Africa has been declining. And that's very consistent with an increasing hunger in the region. Of course, one of the major problems in Africa right now is conflict, no? Is the continent with the biggest number of conflicts, which also affects food insecurity directly, and one of the major drivers. But what we see in Africa is that there is an enormous space to improvement in terms of total factor productivity. Africa is the continent that uses the less amount of fertilizers. The penetration of use of fertilizer is extremely low, which means that the productivity, by using better inputs and also matching that with the soil maps to understand what really the soil needs for the commodity that is being grown, it has enormous potential. But we need to reduce the risks. And that's where we need to find ways in which we can reduce the risk. Now, if you look at Africa and you start mapping what we call areas with agricultural potential, which is what we do under our Hand in Hand initiative, you will see that many of the migration comes from areas where we have agricultural potential. What this means, what agricultural potential means, is that today, these farmers are making $1 or less than $1 a day per capita, which puts them in poverty or extreme poverty, when they really have the potential to do $5 or $6 per capita per day if they were able to resolve the bottlenecks that they are facing. If we are able to do that and we're able to increase their income in such dimensions, of course, these people will prefer to stay where they are rather than to migrate outside. But again, that also requires that the risks are being reduced in terms of conflict, and that's where we need to work, because the problem of conflict is also related to income, and that's where we need to put intensive work to try to increase income, especially in these areas where agriculture has potential. In the areas that agriculture does not have potential, that's where we need to work with other skill sets, which other agencies can do, more related to human capital, for example, that will allow them to find other types of jobs so that they can increase their income.
Just small, short from someone you know from Rome, Pernilla.
Thank you, Maximo. Pernilla Ivarsson, Deputy Perm Rep in FAO. And thank you so much for the presentation, and comprehensive, and as always, very interesting. I have a small question on the first slide you showed, which was consequences for youth. And if I remember correctly, after COVID, FAO did some analysis of the consequences for youth from COVID. And that showed that there were, and I think that was actually in economic terms, that showed some result. But when you divided that between men and women, you saw a different picture, because you would see that the consequences were mainly for women who lost their jobs, whereas the men didn't really see. I guess this was young women and men. And I was wondering, when you look at youth, would you see the same differences, or would this show more of a same picture for independing on, or not depending on sex? Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Pernilla. First of all, deep apologies. I couldn't be sitting with you there. Deep apologies for that. Look, when we did the COVID analysis and we decomposed, what we found in COVID is that the rural areas were less affected by COVID-19. The major impact was in peri-urban and urban areas. Now, what happens in peri-urban and urban areas, where the definition of urban and peri-urban is kind of normative. Sometimes it's based on population, sometimes it's basically a political issue. But what happened is that most of the processing of food, especially high-value commodities, happens in the border between rural and peri-urban because of the need of energy. So all the processing, the packaging, what we call the maquila in agri-food systems, was damaged substantially. And these are sectors which are gender intensive. So these are sectors which are more female intensive. Therefore, those plants suffer a significant shrink during COVID-19, and that affected more women relative to men that were working more in the field, in the rural fields. And that's where we saw the bigger impact in the female labor. Now, overall, when we look at the decomposition of youth, of course, especially in Africa, still we see a significant gap between women and men. The gap started to decrease at the global level and also at the African level, but we have seen, especially in Africa, a slight increase again. And that's where we need to, again, focus again. We're doing a lot of effort. We published a report of women in the agri-food systems, and we have a whole movement towards how we can empower more women so that we can accelerate their transformation process and include them in the value-added process of production. But yes, the gaps are there. The gaps are no longer decreasing at the velocity we had hoped. COVID-19 exacerbated them even more. The hope is that we can start changing that structurally in the future.
Thank you so much. I think we will stop this discussion here. Thank you very much to you, Maximo, to be here with us. We thank you again with an applause from here.
Thank you so much to all of you.
Enjoy Rome, and we continue our seminar here. We are a little late. Shame on me as a time manager, but I think it was good for us to have the possibility to discuss this directly with Mr. Torero from Rome. We will now look to the future, and with that we will have a new panel, and Rebecca Romstedt will be the moderator for the next. So I leave it to you. And in the meantime, I can tell you that someone left his or her glasses here. Maybe you have been looking for them, but you didn't see them. Just det. Tvåan var det.
Precis. Ja, men vad bra. Det har alltid varit min dröm att ha en sån här sedan jag var liten och vill bli popstjärna. Ja. Inge och Cecilia. So thank you, Rolf, for that introduction. Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay, I hope this works better. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here and to moderate this final panel of today's event. I am Rebecca Romstedt. I'm a program and policy officer at the permanent representation of Sweden to FAO, and I work closely with Pernilla Ivarsson that you had the pleasure of listening to early today in Rome. My relationship with the FAO goes back not 75, but about 10 years ago, when I started as an intern and later as a communication specialist for the FAO. So while now I'm on the member state sides, I also have had the opportunity to get to know FAO from the inside. So it's basically been part of my working career the whole time in one way or the other. We started today's event looking at the past, so now we will take a look at the future, and we will look through the lens of young professionals in the field of agriculture and food systems. And like we just heard Mr. Torero say in his presentation, youth play a fundamental role in transforming our food systems and in achieving food security. They are the current and next generation of food producers and also innovators that can drive change. At the same time, they're not always invited in decision-making processes that will affect them, and they meet other obstacles as well in their field, whether it is in farming or more in the scientific field or others. So in this panel, we will discuss challenges, but also possibilities related to the generational shift, the role of innovation and technology, land tenure rights, and not least climate change. And all of this is, of course, interlinked issues. Furthermore, the panel will reflect on the future of food as well as the role that FAO and the Swedish FAO Committee can play for them. So without further ado, I would like to put the spotlight on our excellent panelists. I will let you introduce yourselves briefly and tell your story of what inspired you to get into this field of work. So if we start with Katarina Wolf, you're the chair of the Federation of Young Swedish Farmers. You're a dairy farmer and also a member of the Swedish FAO Committee since a few years. The floor is yours, Katarina.
Thank you. First, I'd like to just add to the protocol that we all managed to put our microphones on the right way in the youth panel. Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, my name is Katarina Wolf. I'm the chair of the Swedish Association of Young Farmers, and I'm also a dairy farmer. I didn't have a defining moment when I realized I wanted to be a farmer. I actually moved away from Sweden after school. I worked in Berlin for a year, in Oslo for a year. And then we started our process of the generational renewal in 2014. I have three siblings, two older brothers. But I think I asked myself the question of living in a very uncertain world. What is the line of profession you can get into that's very certain? What can you produce that will be needed for many, many years, forever probably? So that's why I decided to, together with my two brothers, to take over the farm at home. Plus, it's very fun to, work with the natural cycles of a farm and work closely to nature. So that's me.
Thank you, Katarina. We're very happy to have you on the panel. Next to Ebba Engström, you're a PhD student at the Center for Environmental Policy at the Imperial College in the UK. And you've also been a member of the Young Scientist group that's part of the World Food Forum that FAO is hosting.
Yeah, so that's a great introduction from your end. So that's what I do. But in terms of what inspired me to get into this field, I'm a researcher, but I think it's always been interesting to look at the complexity of agri-food systems and understand how interlinked different aspects are. So, I've had this question before as part of different interview processes and so, and I've always had to track back to where it all stems from. And for me, it was really geography and history lessons where it was this focused on how food is at the core of our society and how so many political issues come from the lack of food. So I think that was what developed my interest, but then of course I've gone on to work more closely with people and with different farmers and with different, wine growers specifically in the UK. But I'm always so inspired to be working with these individuals. So it's really inspiring to be part of this panel with two people who are farmers. So yes.
Thank you so much, Ebba. And you, Carl Philip Trolle-Hjelte, you're a grain farmer and you're also a member of the KSLA Committee for Youth Issues. So what inspired you to get into this field?
Well, there was land in my family, but I grew up in a military family far away from the farm, and I suppose my parents thought it would build character to send me there to work for the summer holidays and weekends. And I don't know if it did, but what it did do was that I realized it was great fun. Farming really came to mean something to me that I hadn't expected. It was tremendously rewarding, this practical work. So when I finished school, I abandoned my former hopes of entering the diplomatic service and realized that I should go on to the agricultural university. And I'm very happy to be the second grain farmer up here today. It's very, very good to see that we take part in these discussions, these very important discussions. And also representing the Board Committee for Youth here at the Royal Academy for Forestry and Agriculture. I have to say that it's very good to be invited. We do have this youth committee and not everyone knows about it. So very, very good that we are involved here today.
Thank you, Carl Philip. We're very happy to have you all here. Katarina, you mentioned in your introduction the generational shift that you've done in your family, and this is a real challenge in Sweden and in other places today. In Sweden, the average age of farmer is around 60 years of age, and there are many challenges for the younger generation to take over. However, the will is there, it seems. A recent report from the Federation of Young Swedish Farmers showed that many young people dream of a life as a farmer, but only few has the possibility. As much as 94% of young farmers are interested in taking over a farm, but they find obstacles in the way. So, Katarina, what would you say are the possibilities with intergenerational shift, but also what are the barriers and how can we overcome them?
Well, thank you. This is a very important issue close to my heart. I think the challenges in Sweden are basically the same as the entire European Union, but also globally, I would imagine. As you mentioned, we have in Sweden, the average age is about 60. It differs between 58 and 62 years old. I think 1/3 of farmers in Sweden have passed the age of retirement, and we see a development where more farmers tend to shut down their farm instead of shifting it to the next generation. And in the European Union, I think 10% of the farmers is under 40 years old. So we need to shift more farms and turn around this trend. And I think this is a very complex problem. There's a lot of issues and barriers surrounding it. But if I would mention 3 major barriers that I've recognized since releasing our report, I would say as number 1, access to financial support. Many young farmers, if they're going to start up or take over a farm, it requires a lot of money. And young farmers often lack that kind of resources. And the banks are rarely able to loan you the money because you don't have a financial track record as a young farmer. As number 2, I would say access to land. That's also an issue, both in Sweden, in the European Union, and globally. And not only does young farmers compete with older, more established farmers, you also compete with governments and other stakeholders for the land. So I think the governments need to create policies to support and facilitate land for young farmers. And number 3, which is an important issue to me, is the social sustainability part. I think in a more equal agriculture sector, which I hope we're heading against at least, I think issues like parental leave will be an important issue to our generation of farmers. And when I speak to farmers in Europe or in the world, a lot of people mention work-life balance as an important thing. You need to be able to have work life, but also a social life and the free time. And a very good friend of mine, my predecessor, Elizabeth, who was chair before me, she had a meeting with the current agriculture commissioner in the EU, Christoph Hansen, a couple of weeks ago. And she asked him a question. She said, do you choose cows or do you choose children? And he didn't answer. And I think she had proven her point. You shouldn't have to choose between having children or having cows. And I think that says it all.
Thank you, Katarina, for sharing those important points. And in your own experience, how is your work-life balance at the moment?
I think it can always develop to the better, but I think it's always a very relevant issue for us, for me and my brothers, and we speak a lot about it. They have small children and families. The way we run the farm as 3 siblings with partners who are not, involved in the farm, it's always up for discussion. Every meeting we have, every day, every week, to get vacation. That's important, and to always have a couple of days off.
That's good to hear, and that might also be something that maybe prevent or scare people from getting into farming. So I wanted to ask you also how we can encourage more and also new people into agriculture and farming, because there is a large interest, I think, but maybe not everyone wants to or can take this step.
That's a good question. I think, first of all, in Sweden at least, I think we can do better at showing what modern farming actually looks like. So we're more modern. We have to be more transparent, I think, in showing what the production is like in 2025 and what has happened in the sector in the last 50 years. But I also think there's a lot of potential, as you mentioned. The World Economic Forum actually named farming as the most important job in 2030. So that should speak for itself. I think that we need more young people joining. But I also think it's quite simple, like when you talk about how attractive the farming sector is. I think there's 2 things that you want. You want reasonable wages, you want to get paid for what you produce, and you want the same social benefits as anyone else in any other profession. That's the two most important things.
Yes, that's very understandable. And for you, Carl Philip, what do you think is needed to encourage more young people into farming?
Well, Rebecca, I'm certain that we have to remember that we have a responsibility to show, as Katarina already said, what sustainable farming practices, agricultural practices overall look like. Not long ago, and most of you know this, most people had a connection to farm life and agriculture through their parents or grandparents, wider families. But this has, in a surprisingly short time, been lost to most of us. Today, the division between urban life and country life, so to speak, is growing. And we have to close this gap. And this can only be done from us, the farmers. It's very difficult to point somebody towards it without a host showing you how this is done. And secondly, of course, I too have to be vulgar and talk about money. That farmers get paid for what they actually do is tremendously important. And we don't just produce food, even though that is, of course, our fundamental and first responsibility. We are all stewards of the landscape. This sounds like a cliche, but it's very true. We provide other environmental services, and that is something we have to remind people of.
Thank you for that, Carl Philip. In the presentation of Mr. Torero, he also mentioned the role of technology in attracting more young people. Ebba, you have contributed to a recent FAO report on this topic called Digital Technologies for Multidimensional Youth Engagement in Agri-Food Systems Transformation. What role would you say that technology can play in this?
Well, I believe it can play a pretty big role. So I think Torero really pointed it out there that it's, the aspect, the aspect that, of course, that it can attract youth in terms of increasing efficiency and productivity, that it gives an opportunity for youth to engage in agriculture in a different way. There's been a lot of talk in recent years about, how farmers are, in a sense, also becoming technology managers. But it also allows for people to make evidence-based decision-making and therefore facilitating what the role of a farmer can be. So I think that's a key part to it. But of course, when we talk agri-food systems, that's wider. And there are aspects related here to, decision-making, so how to include youth in decision-making around agri-food systems topics in terms of virtual meetings, but also online campaigns and giving youth a space to have input on these topics. And then, of course, we must see that youth exist everywhere in all sectors. I mean, I guess within the FAO context, it's 18 to 35 is the age that is counted as youth, which is quite broad. So, I mean, I don't know if I should count myself as youth anymore, actually, but, so in that context, youth are also like people who develop these technologies, and they're also the ones who, use them. It can be used as a tool to also, like social media, to showcase, as we're talking here, about the realities of farming and give people that knowledge.
Thank you, Ebba. Yeah, there are so many aspects of it and so many ways to engage on various levels. Katarina and Carl Philip, Ebba mentioned that some farmers might think that they become a tech manager or so rather than a traditional farmer. What is your view on this? Katarina, if you want to start.
Well, I'm in the dairy sector, which is a very, nowadays, very high on the tech side. So I think we, in the last decade, have been used to, developing our systems and actually learning quite a lot about how the technologies work and how to integrate it in the animal production. But I think it's also important to still remember that doesn't make you, it still makes you very involved in the farm and in the animals and everything around it, even though you have a lot of tech around dairy production.
Carl Philip, any comments?
Well, in my experience, there's also a certain threat in technology in the way that it has become very expensive in many ways to implement and to use. And I'm not saying that we should fight this, certainly not, we mustn't, but I recall the words of a very well-known Swedish entrepreneur and industrialist who once said that money beats politics, but politics is beaten by technology. And we will have to implement technology in every way of life. And what's become very important already is, of course, data management and how we use data, especially in grain production, in arable production. However, some technological advancements, it's questionable for whom it is for. It is not always driven from the point of view of the farmer and the farming communities. And that's where we have to distinguish between what can actually be helpful and what is simply a full step forward.
Exactly. That shows the importance of having young farmers involved in also in that processes and listening to you and so on. We started off a little bit with a focus on the farmer's perspective, but I wanted to turn to you again, Ebba, because it's important to empower youth in all parts of the food systems, and you're a scientific researcher, so I wanted to see what challenges are you facing in your field as a young woman scientist?
Yeah, so as a scientist, I'll speak, of course, as someone who does academic research, because you can be a scientist in many regards. But what I will say, I think one of the key parts we should be focusing on and talking a lot more about are like institutional mechanisms to protect young researchers from, a culture which might sometimes foster, unfair treatment of young researchers, as well as, bullying. And I think it's important that we talk about this and keep talking about this, because even though it might be a bit taboo in some sense, in some, which it shouldn't be, but it's not often brought up. But at the same time, I know so many people and, who have been the victims of this. So I think it's important to put in like proactive measures to, foster a good like work environment for young researchers, that there's an understanding, that of like development, but also like proper accreditation. And in the same sense, not only proactive, but reactive mechanisms when things go wrong, that there are actual good repercussions for what happens. Because as a young researcher, usually in an academic institution, you come in with little social capital and also little cultural capital, in the sense that you might not have the expertise, you might not have, published that many papers. So it's really important that those mechanisms are in place and standardized, I believe, and that we keep talking about this, and that more senior researchers are also able to come in and, that we call each other out for certain behaviors. Yeah.
Thank you, Ebba. Again, this shows the importance of the intergenerational support, and so having a support system for that in place. So thank you so much for sharing that. We also discussed a little bit ahead of this event, Carl Philip, you brought up the importance of safeguarding land rights of the individual in order to stop farmland loss, and this is something also that Katarina mentioned, access to land is one of the major challenges. What are the overall benefits of private ownership of land, and why is it so important to safeguard that?
There are two overall benefits that I'd like to bring up, even though I believe there are many more, but that's a different discussion. Well, firstly, it contributes to how attractive farming is. I believe it's a very strong drive for many young farmers that you get to be independent, you get to see the results of your work. And when this is reined in too much, both by uncertainties, you don't know if it's going to be repurposed for something else or threatened by policies, it makes it much less fun, much less interesting, much less viable to work, to develop your company, to invest indeed. And we will need very large investments returning to the matter of technology, which is on the march. And of course, secondly, it's also a matter of a fundamental principle. The right to property is a human right. It's part of the Sustainable Development Goals, Peace and Justice, number 16, and I believe it's often overlooked. We just have to go back to the philosophical tragedy of the commons and be reminded of what it often means when land is transferred from private to public ownership, or indeed to nobody's ownership at all. Safeguarding this is a matter of not only individual rights, but also the benefits and good of society, not least in the developing world.
Thank you. And how do we ensure landowners' rights of ownership when demands on land, agricultural land especially, are increasing in terms of infrastructure and the growth of urban areas?
Yes, now on to the how from the why. It is in many ways a matter, as in so many other areas, a matter of payment. If it's difficult and expensive to repurpose land, it won't be done as easily, as haphazardly as it sometimes is. If we have a holistic approach and weigh the benefits of farmland vis-a-vis other uses of land, we will arrive at a conclusion that is evidence-based, that takes into account the various aspects of sustainability, and hopefully acknowledge the importance of the family farm. The family farm, since that is the most common one in our part of the world, could of course also be other enterprises.
Very interesting to hear your views on this, Carl Philip. I don't know, Katarina, if you want to add something. You touched upon this earlier.
Well, I just totally agree with you, Carl Philip, but it's also, as you touched upon, very important because land, and as we have a lot of in Sweden, forest is a security for many farmers. And of course, if it's very uncertain, if you're going to be able to actively produce or to actually, that the land has a value, you also will be hesitant to develop and invest in your companies. And we have a few cases in Sweden right now where a generational shift cannot be made because of the government taking the forest and stopping the owner from cutting it down, and then it loses its value. So it's a big problem, and I think Carl Philip is entirely right.
Thank you. Yes, as we see, it's all interlinked, and yeah, now we've discussed a generational shift and the issue of land tenure. I wanted to move on a little bit to talk about climate change, which was also, it was a nice bridge from Maximo's presentation because he touched on a lot of these topics that we're discussing also in this panel, the importance of preparedness and resilience. But to start off, as you as farmers, to begin with, in what ways are you experiencing the impacts of climate change, and what are you doing to reduce your climate footprint in your farming? Maybe Carl Philip, if you want to start.
Yes, in every way, almost, I'd say. It's become increasingly clear to me that this is something that has happened and will continue to happen. And the only thing that I know for certain is that I don't really know what it will be like in the future. Of course, this is very demanding in many ways because the margins of farming are already very small, the sort of margins of error, and now they become increasingly smaller. We have to put even more effort into this proactive work, which we don't know if it will pay off or not, but when there is a crisis or a change which can't be foreseen, it will be tremendously important that we are ready. And this is very much, I believe, a matter of sort of physical, it's a physical question. It's about how we produce, how the land looks, not least, of course, in the matter of water, which has been very much discussed in the past few seasons here. And agroforestry will come into it as well. We have to adapt the techniques that we use to these changes.
Thank you. Katarina?
Well, first of all, I think historically, farmers have always been very good at adapting. I mean, you run your farm on with stuff happening that you can't control, you know, the weather, uncertainties in the world that affects the markets. So I think historically it's in our DNA to be able to adapt and to make quick changes to our production. But I think what we've been seeing, of course, in the past years is something more extreme. I know it on my own farm. We had the droughts have been more currently occurring in the past few years. But I also think it's important to remember that agriculture is the only circular sector that can actually bind carbon dioxide. And I think that's important to remember when we talk about these issues. And I think it's also a common misconception that farmers are you know, a little bit against working for the climate and lower the emissions. I would say that's false. We know what has to be done. We know what investments we have to do to lower the emissions, to become more climate efficient. But I think the big question is who's going to pay for it? Because we know farmers have a low profitability overall, and we cannot afford to make these investments. It has to get paid by the market, by the consumers. So that's the biggest issue, I think. And also, just to add one last remark, I think and Carl Philip touched on that, the climate adaptation must happen simultaneously as we invest for lowering our emissions.
It's very encouraging to hear you being so engaged in this important issue. There's also this other aspect to think of climate change, the fact that, you know, it will change the conditions of production. And I wanted to ask you, Ebba, because your research is focused on wine growing.
Yep.
So how do you see the future from that perspective?
I think, I mean, even though we talk about this like boom of wine growing, especially in the UK, you know, The Guardian and so forth, they all went out with, oh, it's a boom, this is exciting, you know, best year ever for growing grapes, this is the future. But of course, simultaneously, you know, I work very closely with wine growers, I talk to wine growers regularly, and they still face these challenges of uncertainty. And that's the thing, climate change is uncertainty. You don't know, like, if the next season is going to look the same as the last one, and that's the tricky part. So it's, I think the same aspect of adaptation is very important, and there has been research now done in the UK as well on climate change adaptation in the wine growing sector, which is very good to see, because every day they're facing these challenges and they're having to think ahead, and they should be thinking ahead in terms of like what they're planting and so forth. And in terms of Sweden, we're also seeing this development here. There's you know, a growing wine sector also now with that cellar door sales are being made you know, viable. That's might change things in the sector as well and in its growth, but at the same time, this knowledge exchange around adaptation has to increase and has to continue. Yeah.
So it sounds like a bit, I still have to bring some bottles of wine when I come next time from
Absolutely.
Rome. Good. Good. So we touched a lot of different challenges here in terms of climate change, technology, innovation, generational shift that we have identified. So if we connect this now to FAO, it would be interesting to hear how you see the role of FAO and also the Swedish FAO Committee, and how you would like to engage with this organization and what it can offer. So Ebba, we mentioned earlier that you have been part of this young scientist group. So I wanted to ask a little bit what that has given you and in what ways you would like to continue to engage with the FAO.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I am so thankful for this experience I had with the FAO and the World Food Forum. It was really a fantastic, you know, mandate to have. And I think like one of the key parts is, of course, this opportunity to work with other youth who are so engaged about these topics. And I think like the network that I made and the friends that I made it's just incredible. And I think it's like we're all engaged in the same, you know, like-mindedness of what we want going forward. So I think that's great. And I think it also provided me with the opportunity to really work on youth topics, which is a new area that hasn't been, you know, written too much about it. I mean, we talk about youth, you know, encouraging youth to come into agriculture, but really in terms of research focusing on the perspectives of youth and their experience, their lived experiences. So I think it was really interesting to be able to do that type of research in a way, be given the room to do that, and to really also consider youth positionality, to think about like, who am I as a youth, like as a youth, part of the demographic of youth, what are my realities, and to bring that perspective into what we were doing. And I see, you know, the mandate is over, but I do see now like there are ideas, you know, growing from what we can do and what we can work on in terms of research coming from that.
It's good to hear you had such a positive experience and that you're interested in continuing this. Katarina, as we mentioned, you're a member of the Swedish FAO Committee. What does this platform mean to you?
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful to be a part of the Swedish FAO Committee. I'm not sure they've had a youth represent for so many years, so I think that's a positive development, so I'm very grateful. I'd say that I'm a big fan of being organized and engaged overall. I'm organized in the Swedish Association of Young Farmers, and we provide I work a lot against, you know, politicians with our issues and speak up about our issues, but we also, because we're organized all over Sweden, we create, you know, social networks for young farmers in the entirety of Sweden. And I think that's extra important since we're getting fewer and fewer. We need to stay in contact and build bridges between each other. I'm also organized in a dairy cooperative for my farm, which gives me, you know, access to the markets. And I'm engaged in the Swedish FAO Committee, which is very exciting because you get a very broad picture of food security and a lot of global issues, which I can take home to my farm and learn from. And I think I see it as we have a common responsibility all over the world as farmers to provide the population with food. And being engaged and organized in these committees and these organizations that enables, you know, knowledge sharing, partnerships, and all of that in the long term will strengthen our position in the food chain and create, I think, more productivity and more increasing production of food, and that's positive.
Thank you. And Carl Philip, for you, you haven't been engaged yet directly with FAO, but what do you think the organization should focus on when it comes to youth engagement?
Well, as you mentioned, I haven't been very engaged with the FAO or the FAO Committee directly before, and I'm not an academic like my esteemed co-panelist or representing a large organization like Katarina. My everyday work is very practical. It is, for better or worse, firmly rooted in the soil. But then in preparing for this afternoon, I realized what an organization it is. And during this very interesting afternoon, it's become even more clear to me. Earlier this afternoon, we heard Cecilia and Nordin from Gansberghe touch on this, that there's so much knowledge and expertise within the FAO and its various frameworks. And it really would be wonderful and very beneficial for all of us if this could be shared more widely or made more accessible. It is not always easy to distinguish between different fora for information and to find this information for yourself. So I believe that this is a field where the FAO could really reach out to people all over the world, really, mainly those dealing in the practical fields. I'd be very happy to participate and to learn more.
We will pass on the message, surely. Yes, and I cannot but agree, and I also see it a little bit from the other side. Other panelists and speakers today mentioned also the purpose of getting, you know, more Swedes into the organization and more Swedish expertise in this normative knowledge organizations. I think that's also a very important point to make. At this point, I wanted to ask if we have any questions from the audience. I see already a hand here, first row. You others can get ready. Cecilia, please.
Hear about your commitment to farming, because no farmers, no food share, as they say. What I wanted to ask you, because I met a long time ago a sheep farmer. She said she earned more money by showcasing her work with the sheepdogs than with the sheep. So I was wondering, how much time do you put into making reels and being on Instagram and creating a virtual presence? You don't have cows, but to organize events and things like that. Is that a must or not?
Good question. Who wants to address it?
Did I get your question right? Could you say the last part again?
A social presence. Do you earn more money by getting followers and whatever?
I think it depends. Maybe if you sell your product on the farm, which is just growing in Sweden. If you have a dairy or a slaughterhouse at your farm. There are some like farming influencers, I think, in Sweden, who actually do a great job at showing the day-to-day activities, nothing sugar-coated, just the regular day-to-day work. And I think they do a good job at showing what farming actually looks like. But I think we could do better. We tried from my youth organization around the regions in Sweden to be very active at schools. You talked about closing the gap between the producers and the consumers. We tried to, make that gap smaller by actually teaching small children what farming, taking them out to farms, showing it what the modern farming looks like. So there's a lot of activities going on, but I think we could do better. And I think my members in the youth organization have a big need for the big medias, maybe showing farming in a more balanced way than they're doing right now. And I think that would be important to affect the picture of farming.
Sounds very good. There are so many foodies and food influencers around, and people are really crazy about what we put on our plate. So I think having more influencers also on that side to raise awareness and create interest also would be really good. Any more questions from the audience? Anders.
Anders Malmer, post SLU and other things. I just want to make a comment. There is a FAO e-learning academy. Been around for a couple of years on the question of how to grasp this, some of this expertise, which have overflowing amount of e-courses. I've been myself involved, and others in Sweden have been involved in various of those courses. Check that on the web.
Thank you for the tip. Any other questions? Yes.
So, Krishan Kent, the Sweden Seafood Association again. I got a reflection at the Ukraine war when that broke out, and we had this huge food inflation and insecurity of the food supply chain. And at that point, I remember that the former Minister of Agriculture, she pointed to all of us in the audience, which were representing the industry, to say, you need to see how you can assist the society in contributing to secure food supply. And I never, had thought about that issue because food is natural. We have a surplus of it. And at that point, I felt that, all right, if there is a crisis, then there is a few factories and farmers that are supposed to ensure stability of the economy. And at that sense, I also felt how many we are that take this for granted when there is a public discussion, and how few there are to defend it. And I would like to ask you the question, what did you expect from the institutions and from us as citizens to assist you in ensuring a positive feedback on the work that you are doing every day to ensure that my children have food, or if we have too much, that we also can export to geographies where they have a deficit of nutritional foods. So that's my question to you, how you feel on that.
Once again, I think,
Yeah,
sorry about
yeah, no, no, you start.
Right.
Go ahead.
Once again, I do feel like this is, in a way, a matter of standing together in this. It's not always just about, the farmers producing for everybody else. It's about ensuring that farming, agriculture in general, is a matter of concern for all of society. We have to try and involve the people, not directly or practically involved with farming in what we do, and make them, in whatever little way, feel part of it. And now how to do that is a more difficult matter, but I think it's important to try.
Yeah, I think I will add to that because, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I have a huge respect for farmers. And I personally think that maybe we put a lot of criteria on farmers, and we often discuss like what farmers need to do to change, but at the same time, maybe the discussion isn't held as much around other agri-food system actors and what needs to be done there. Of course, we talk about food waste and the need to minimize things on the consumer side as well, and, you know, us as consumers making more sustainable decisions and, you know, more proactive decisions. But at the same time, you know, all the other people there in the middle, we also need to discuss, you know, the role of retailers, what they can do. We need to discuss more around, you know, distributors and so forth, and making sure things add up along the value chain in itself. So for me, yeah, I completely agree with your sentiment, and it's something I think about as well.
Well, first of all, you mentioned the food production strategy before, 2.0. And to try to be positive, I mean, we're almost the only country, I think, in the European Union who actually set the goal to increase our production of food in Sweden. And that in itself, I think, is extremely positive for the whole society and for the young generation of farmers, that our government is very clear on that we're going to increase the production. But then to circle back what we talked about in the beginning of generational renewal, we still need some tools to actually make that happen. So it doesn't, you know, still be a piece of paper that doesn't evolve to anything. We need the right tools, financial support for young farmers, social benefits, access to land. Those are some of the tools. But I think that goal, the overall goal, is very positive, and I think that will contribute to a positive development in the future.
Thank you. I see we have a question in the corner.
SAI. One striking thing with this panel is that you are so knowledgeable and well educated, and I think that's representative in the sense of Swedish farmers today, that there is a high level of education and awareness and sort of be able to take on all these challenges. At the same time, we have a global community with a fairly low level of formal education, but there's a lot of indigenous knowledge and so on. So, and I wonder, in my generation, and if I look at my farming generation, I'm 60, we didn't share that much. The global outlook of an average Swedish farmer was fairly limited, I would say. Would you say that your generation now has a broader sort of scope and interest in sort of engage also beyond Europe, also, you know, maybe Africa, Latin America, Asia, to sort of share knowledge and influences, and is there a scope for that?
It's very interesting that you bring this up, because we discussed earlier during the intermission and the coffee that I believe that in the past few decades we've come to view other farmers within the European Union as our colleagues, but we still have a very long way to go in viewing sort of the global farming community as our colleagues. I hope this is changing, and I'll certainly try and do my part, but we still have some way to go. And there's very much to learn from it. It will be beneficial for everybody.
I agree. I was going to just say the same as you. I think since we became members of the European Union in '95, I think a lot of not only young farmers have, of course, been more observant of global markets. I mean, I deliver my dairy, and the price depends on what happens on a global market, so you have to be observant of what's happening around the world. So I think that's a development that we're going to see more of.
Do you want to add something about
No, I think it's good to hear the farmer perspective on this.
Very good. All right. If we don't have any more questions, we will. Yes, we do. Okay, one quick one.
And I will just come back to this generation shift question and the issues of doing a generation shift, but not within the family. How to attract other people coming in, how to be welcoming them. As you said, it's a gap today, the urban community and the rural affairs. How can we work from the farming side to attract more and to be welcoming? I experienced that the last year we have noticed that people coming back, they have been brought up in the countryside with their families. They moved away. They took the education in a totally different area. But then in life, they just got the feeling that they maybe would like to return. So how can we welcome them? And how can we share that we need them? We need also their competence in other areas, but of course, we also have to find spot for them. So this is not really young people, it's not children, it's grown up, it's professionals in other areas, but they are coming back. They are more interesting now in the rural affairs than 5-10 years ago.
I think there are a lot of different answers to that question, and maybe you can add on. But just to take a few of them, I think, first of all, rural areas, how attractive are the rural areas? The access to daycare, to schools, to care, that's a big issue, I think, for actually wanting to live in the countryside. I also think that people in general view the farming sector as quite conservative. And I think we need to challenge maybe what a farmer is in 2025, because I think a lot of people thinks it's a 65, 70-year-old white man, which is true. Like that's the majority of farmers right now. But there's also other farmers like me, like other young people that come from different backgrounds, that gotten into farming without being born on a farm. And we need to be better at showing the diversity, I think, of farming. And we have a long way to go still, but the development has been beginning. So I think we need to be more transparent, that there's more to it than the classical controversial side of it.
Thank you, Katarina. I think we need to continue, but before wrapping up, I wanted to give you a chance to share your thoughts on the future of agriculture and food systems. We started looking at the past. The world has changed in many ways and continues to do so. But what you said, Katarina, in the beginning, that we will always need to eat, we will always need food on our plate. So what do you think it will look like if we were here in yet another 75 years to celebrate another anniversary, and you were on this panel? There will be more people to feed, but how would it look like according to you? How many will be involved in food production, or will there be robots, or what will it look like? So I invite you in 1 minute each to pitch or to present your ideas. What do you think it would look like?
Well, maybe you'll be drinking Swedish wine next time.
Perfect.
No, but I think with that being said, I think Sweden will develop probably in terms of, what it grows, what crops are coming into play. But I think at the base of it, it's still key then that it's like we don't give that the whole focus. We need to find that balance, because at the same time, we do keep also discussing aspects of, preparation, beredskap in Swedish, and finding that balance, of romanticized agriculture versus also the realities, and making sure we maintain food security. Yeah.
Thank you, Katarina.
I think this is my 4th future panel this month, where I've been in this future part where I'm supposed to, foresee the future. I don't think I'm more equipped than anyone here to say what's going to happen in 75 years. You're probably more equipped, because you say you have to look at your past, see the future. We live in a very uncertain world, and I think none of us 10 years ago would have predicted, the COVID pandemic or Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we are sure that it's going to probably keep on being uncertain in the future. What I do know is that my generation, our generation, is going to be the one facing those challenges in the future. So I think it's very important that we are included in the discussions and the decision making in all of these panels to actually discuss the future. That's the most important thing. And I think it was Pernilla who said something about the FAO is relevant, but we need to work on being more relevant in the future. And there's nothing I'm more sure that we're going to keep being relevant, but hopefully maybe in 75 years we're very relevant, the most relevant.
Well, I certainly do hope that even if this decrease in people directly involved with agriculture continues, we'll view it more as a shared responsibility and a shared source of pride in 75 years, that food production is a matter of concern for everybody, not just for the farmers. Of course, we'll have safeguarded the the rights to property to land tenure. But by doing this, we'll have made it accessible to so many more people who live far away from the countryside, people who don't live on the coastlines, that we've made sure that they can take, delight in this wonderful resource that we have, our agricultural land, our forests, and our long coastline. We have to make sure that even though they are meant to produce food, to produce various commodities, wood, fish, they are also a source of, refreshment and enjoyment for many people, far beyond the scope of the everyday farmer.
Thank you. Time will tell. And I think with that, we can wrap up this session. You have shown how important it is to bring you into this conversation. You have shown a wealth of knowledge and creativity. So I thank you so much for being here, and also to the audience for your active participation and in questions. So with that, I think we can close. Thank you.
Thank you. Oops. Thank you very much to the panel and to Rebecca for this. And actually, it seems like we are just finalizing in time. Well done. We are now coming to the last point and closing remarks, and here it will be Fredrik Alfer who will conclude this. Deputy Director General at the Ministry of Rural Affairs and Infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. The State Secretary sends his regrets. He had to leave to other pressing matters. So I will have the honor of closing this seminar. So thank you, Rolf, for a job well done. And a very big thank you to all the participants in the room and online. I think there have been many interesting interventions, and I have certainly enjoyed them and been inspired by them, and I hope you have been too. Because when planning this seminar, we had the ambition to showcase the breadth and the depth of the Swedish engagement in FAO and all the different parts of the organization's work. And at least I dare say that we have succeeded in showing this multitude of activity. I'm very impressed by the collective experience and competence that has been on display today, and I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope you have done too, and that you have benefited by some of the ideas and perspectives that have been presented. It is clear that the FAO and the FAO Committee has been relevant for a long time and surely remains pertinent and important today. So indeed, we've had a full program, and I won't hold you to the refreshments any longer, but it's been a very interesting afternoon, and I appreciate your activity. And finally, just let me express my gratitude to the team who has been set this seminar up. Excellent job. And also our appreciation to the Royal Swedish Academy of Forestry and Agriculture for supporting and assisting in creating this event. Thank you so much.